The mother-in-law kicked the village orphan daughter-in-law out the door, and after a while of seeing her, numbers were crucial in Nellie's life. And could it be otherwise with more than 40 years of accounting experience? Immediately after the institute, she was assigned to a food processing plant, where she worked faithfully for more than 10 years, until the collapse of the union. The combine was drowning in debts, and by the mid-90s finally collapsed. While others ran in panic about tomorrow, Nellie, then still Nellie, quickly realized who takes control of the market and through old connections got a job in a construction company, which was run by brothers. Nellie faithfully kept the books, often received good gifts from the bosses for labor in the form of cognac and expensive foreign candy. Nellie was not ashamed to participate in the dubious affairs of the owners of the company, then secured a spacious 2-room apartment in the center of the city for nothing. Own figures never let her down. She could rely on them and only on them. The dashing 90s were replaced by the new millennium. Gradually, loopholes and holes in the laws and taxation system became less and less. It was no longer possible to pull off the old schemes, and the legitimacy of her employer's business was becoming more and more suspicious. Nellie prudently quit her job when she realized that she smelled a stink and went to work in the university accounting department. The pay there, of course, was more modest, but it was peaceful. Yes, and take a remote maintenance of document management of some small entrepreneurs. No one forbade her. Secretly, of course. The main thing was that the numbers were happy again. Soon Nellie turned into Nellie Smith. She was respected by her colleagues for her acumen, experience, and impeccable professionalism. She was also feared by the students, where Nina Ivanovna taught economics and other specialized disciplines, having quickly received a correspondence pedagogical education. Figures pleased, led her through life, and never once failed. Only in one thing the figures did not help. Nina Ivanovna had no personal life by the age of 60. True, there was a joyous son, Matthew. The woman met his father while she was working for the brothers. It was a visitor from the village, a handsome guy, with a rich imagination, who misled her. A pretty accountant. When Nellie suspected that he was interested in her apartment, specifically the propiska in it, she noisily kicked the suitor out and found out she was pregnant the same week. From a small age, Matthew she brought up disciplined, collected, and responsible. The boy at the age of 4 could fry eggs, never cried or complained. He graduated from school with a silver medal. Nellie dreamed that her son received a higher education, and therefore saved money for it almost from his first grade. And when he passed on the budget, and even at the law school, the woman could not rejoice. Money in one piece, and her son will be a lawyer, as she wanted. Since Matthew's birth, Nellie has never had another serious relationship. She'd had affairs, of course, but it was always numbers that interfered. The beau didn't earn enough. What kind of a man was he who earned less than she did? It's a shame to go out in public with such a man. He wasn't tall enough, or too old, or too young. And constantly it seemed to Nellie that all the gentlemen are trying to steal her living space, gained even if not quite honest, but painstaking labor. In the big city, there are many who want to settle down without much worry at someone else's expense. Nellie was determined not to be that expense. All she cared about were the numbers, the welfare of herself and her son. That evening, Nellie waited for her son to come to dinner, somehow nervously. First she broke a cup, then she scattered salt on the table. The woman was not a superstitious woman, but the resulting mess irritated her. Matthew had shown up at 9 o'clock, cheerful and overjoyed, a vivid expression of emotion he didn't often display. And Nellie didn't welcome such extravaganzas from experience. She knew they usually had 3 reasons, and there were rarely good ones in love, drunk, or an idea that required money. The first had been settled long ago. Matthew was indifferent to that. He wasn't partial to the second one either, so. Well, tell me what you've already thought up, Nellie asked, looking at her offspring from head to toe through her thin glasses. What have you thought of, Mom? Matthew tried to hide his enthusiasm, but it didn't work very well. He was literally bursting with bright colors. I can't see it, the woman shook her head. Matthew hesitated and sat down on a stool at the table. He knew that, as usual, his mother rejected all his ideas. She thought she knew what was best for her son. No, Matthew was grateful for her sensitivity, but he had never tried to follow her instructions completely. When she forbade him to get a dog as a child, the enterprising Matthew disappeared to the house of his friend Andrew. He did not like his German shepherd Palma, and with the dog Matthew quickly got used to it, even walked with it, gladly replacing the lazy companion. After such walks of her son, Nellie wrinkled her nose, not understanding why suddenly the apartment smelled of dog. In high school, Matthew dreamed of playing the guitar, but Nellie said that the guitar was the domain of idlers. Look at Vysotsky. How much did he accomplish? Mother was wringing her hands in front of her son. But Vysotsky is a legendary man, 16-year-old Matthew parried. A good legend, a circus performer. Nellie spent her life in theaters with her guitar and eventually died at 42. You know why? You should lead a normal life, a serious life. Think about your future promising profession and not play the guitar. Matthew realized that it was useless to argue. His mother's stubbornness was strong. It was a blessing that she worked a lot and was interested only in her son's grades, regimen, and nutrition. Otherwise, Matthew was exempted from the need to report. If they didn't ask, they could. He got an old guitar, found new strings in the morning before dawn, and asked the music teacher to help him with tuning the instrument. In a couple of days, Matthew had a good guitar, though shabby, but it sounded perfect. He played it on camping trips with his class, at first-grade matinees at school, and in Andrew's father's garage. Open fingers, he honed in cold water at night. After a few years, however, the love of strings in the guy waned, and the guitar stayed at Andrew's buddy in the garage finally. "Mom, you've been saving money for my education, and I'm studying on a budget," Matthew started from afar. Let's say Nellie raised her right eyebrow. She wasn't wrong again. "I was thinking that I could get a part-time job in the evenings after school. It's about time. I'm 22 soon." Matthew knew just how to placate his mother before revealing his part-time plans. "Who's stopping you?" Nellie agreed, not yet understanding the connection in her son's words. "Well, I got my license in high school, but I haven't had much practice. I have a license, I have free money, I need a car. I'll go to a cab, earn money, and gain experience. You'll always need a car." Matthew exhaled. "A car." Then Nellie muttered. Matthew waited breathlessly, like a pigeon, waiting for a handful of grain from its master. Nellie was figuring out what the car gave and what it would require. A vehicle of one's own was a convenience. Meanwhile, age was making itself felt with sore knees, blood pressure, and an increasing need to get around. The money spent on the car will not hit the family budget because it was put aside long ago. But the question of earning money, but let her son earn a penny, but really learn to drive, will become more responsible, as she wanted. The main thing is not to neglect his studies. The figures add up. A car is a necessary thing, unlike a guitar, Nellie said more warmly. Matthew opened his mouth. He was already making backup plans, how to persuade his friend to hide the car at his place, how to deal with the evening absence. And now this was a gift. "Do you mind?" he asked with a smile he couldn't quite contain. "I'm not euphoric, but I support it," Nellie replied graciously. "Just be careful what you buy. Don't get a thank you." He hugged his mother, and happy, jumped into the room. Of course, the boy had lied a little. Yes, he did want a part-time job in a taxi cab, but even more than that. Matthew wanted freedom from his mother's control. A car offered that opportunity, even if only partially. He could have bought it on the sly. But that wasn't the way the budding lawyer's mind worked. Matthew realized that he needed to prepare the ground and get his mother's official permission to buy it. Then it would be difficult for her to accuse him of anything. And if you periodically bring in the money you earn, Matthew thinks, you'll get approval and you can relax. A week later, Matthew got a foreign car, though not a new one, but not a bad one. Dan, Andrew's father, personally helped him choose it, and a car mechanic can't go wrong. Andrew persuaded Matthew to celebrate the purchase on the first night, but he refused. Instead, he drove around the neighborhood, at first cautiously, getting used to the character of his new friend, and then boldly drove into the city. The car behaved perfectly. In the morning, Matthew drove his mother to work and then ran to his classes, and in the evening he drove around the streets, picking up passengers. Nellie was at first distrustful of the car, but quickly realized how much relief this means of transportation would bring her. Soon the woman got used to it, and even periodically asked her son if he had refueled the car after work and if it needed washing. Matthew chuckled in secret, but did not show it. He had another reason for buying the car, but no one knew about it. At 15, like any teenager, Matthew's hormones were running wild. He became interested in girls. No, the affable and agile boy had never had any trouble making friends with them. Now he was attracted to his former girlfriends in a different way. He wanted to talk to them, to do nice things for them, not just run around the yard. That's how Matthew got his first girlfriend from the parallel class. But when Nellie found out about it, she made a huge scandal. A cat in a bag. Ask a knowledgeable person for help. And don't try to skip classes and fail your diploma. Mom, I know, Matthew reassured her. Thank you. He hugged his mother and jumped into the room happy. Of course, the boy had lied a little. Yes, he really did want a part-time job in the cab business. But even more than that, Matthew wanted freedom from his mother's control. A car offered that opportunity, even if only partially. He could have bought it on the sly, but that wasn't the way the budding lawyer's mind worked. Matthew realized that he needed to prepare the ground and get his mother's official permission to buy it. Then it would be difficult for her to accuse him of anything. And if you periodically bring in the money you earn, Matthew thinks you'll get approval and you can relax. A week later, Matthew got a foreign car, though not a new one, but not a bad one. Dan, Andrew's father, personally helped him choose it, and a car mechanic can't go wrong. Andrew persuaded Matthew to celebrate the purchase on the first night, but he refused. Instead, he drove around the neighborhood, at first cautiously, getting used to the character of his new friend, and then boldly drove into the city. The car behaved perfectly. In the morning, Matthew drove his mother to work and then ran to his classes, and in the evening he drove around the streets, picking up passengers. Nellie was at first distrustful of the car, but quickly realized how much relief this means of transportation would bring her. Soon the woman got used to it, and even periodically asked her son if he had refueled the car after work, and if it needed washing. Matthew chuckled in secret, but did not show it. He had another reason for buying the car, but no one knew about it. At 15, like any teenager, Matthew's hormones were running wild. He became interested in girls. No, the affable and agile boy had never had any trouble making friends with them. Now he was attracted to his former girlfriends in a different way. He wanted to talk to them, to do nice things for them, not just run around the yard. That's how Matthew got his first girlfriend from the parallel class. But when Nellie found out about it, she made a huge scandal. Matthew stood in front of his mother, almost crying, and she lectured him that studying was more important than relationships with girls. The boy wanted to spite his mother by continuing to date the girl of his choice. But Nellie did her best. She found the phone number of the girl's parents and strictly informed them that their daughter was distracting Matthew from his studies. The unyielding tone of the chief accountant put all the dots on I. Matthew had been shunned by a former friend at school. Nellie thought she was doing the right thing, because her own life had never been about the joys of love, only problems and nerves. Why waste precious time on such nonsense? First you have to achieve something, make a reputation, learn, and then look for a suitable couple. And only one that would suit her, Nellie, completely. And some empty-headed girl to stop her Matthew from moving forward. No. Matthew quietly hated his mother's position, but there wasn't much he could do about it. He realized it was useless to argue with her. He had to maintain a secret private life. However, whether it was his aura or Nellie's invisible hand of protection that stretched far away, every new girl did not stay with him for long. At the institute, a quiet horror began around Matthew. Everyone knew where his mother worked, and among graduate students and faculty, gossip spread at the speed of light. And every new girlfriend of her son, the overbearing accountant and part-time faculty member, crucified her classes as best she could. And if she couldn't do it herself, she asked her colleagues to do it for a small favor. One student, Nellie, and her comrades were so driven to such an extent that the poor girl transferred to another university. Matthew eventually realized that if you look for a friend, then outside the institute, where you can hide her from her mother as much as possible. Nothing good came out of this idea. His mother could detect the girl's presence near him by the smell of perfume. She called him if he was late after class. Matthew couldn't get out much, as Nellie encouraged only academic zeal or rare friendships. The shadow of his mother, always invisibly standing behind the young lawyer's back, frightened the girls, and they quickly severed relations with him. Of course, no one wanted to have such a principled and intrusive mother-in-law. Tiana stood in front of the restaurant manager, her tear-red eyes drooping to the floor. For the third time this week, Gavin was sternly reprimanding the waitress just around the corner from the kitchen. "Third time this week you've gotten on my nerves and made me look like an idiot in front of my guests," he said. "But I didn't mean to. I was pushed," the girl tried to justify herself. "We all don't want something. Tiana, you didn't want to break glasses on Monday? You didn't want to forget the dirty rag on the hall table on Wednesday? Didn't want to spill wine on our regular guest today?" The manager folded his arms and lowered his voice, instilling a faint hope in Tiana's heart. "I'll be more careful, honestly, I promise." Gavin sighed irritably. "Promise your mom you'll be back by 11 p.m., and I'll have to fire you. Employees like you are a loss and a disgrace to the establishment. You'll take the money you earned today as a paycheck for your shift and get out of here." Tiana opened her mouth, but the words stuck in her throat. Her eyes stung even more. The manager left. The girl worked a few more hours, despite the dislike of the restaurant's customers. She changed her clothes, stuffed a few bills into the pocket of her cloak, and slipped out of the service exit in a shadow. Only on the street did Tiana allow herself to cry. She had been used to the fact that nothing in life was easy since she was a little girl. Tiana had lost her parents early and knew how hard it was to earn a penny for bread. When she was 7, her family and little brother died in a fire. Nothing was left of the household. The frightened little girl was taken in by an elderly neighbor, Aunt Lexi. She raised the girl, gave her everything she could. But Aunt Lexi could not do much to feed, to drink, to love, and only that. The neighbor's modest money was not enough for beautiful clothes, toys, or sweets. People in the village do not live poorly at all. Tiana helped her mother as much as she could. She took care of the garden and a small farm with a dozen chickens while she was at school. From a small age, Tiana knew how to do everything around the house, cooking and baking. After school, she stayed with Aunt Lexi, even though she insisted on sending her to get an education. "How could I leave you?" Aunt Tiana was carefully smoothing the corner of the pillowcase with an old iron. "Come on, Tiana." Aunt Lexi sat in the chair next to her. "I'm not going anywhere. And you need to get on with your life. You're not going to be cleaning up after me forever." We had this conversation many times. Auntie was cheerful, but Tiana could see that she was finding it harder and harder to do her usual housework every month. In the end, the girl insisted that her aunt go to the city and be examined. The doctors prescribed heart medication and monthly routine checkups. Seeing the prices at the pharmacy, Tiana just splashed her hands. And then she realized that she had to leave after all to move to the city and work so that her aunt could be treated. Without education, it was hard for a girl to find a job, and she had to live somewhere else. On weekends, she took the train to the village to visit her Aunt Lexi. Tiana rented a tiny dorm room on the edge of town and got a job as a cleaner in a shopping center. Things went well at first, but one day she tripped and a bucket of water spilled out. As a result, one of the stores was left without lights and customers for 2 days. Tiana was fired without pay. The girl did not grieve long and decided to try to work as a nanny in a recruitment agency. They looked squeamishly at her manicure-less hands, dirty from working in the vegetable garden and scrubbing floors, and said, "We've looked at your nails and we're asking you to leave." Tiana sighed, but these very dirty by the standards of city ladies' hands did not put down. She started handing out leaflets and newspapers. True, the income from such work was quite modest. Once in those very newspapers, she saw an ad that the restaurant requires an assistant waiter, dishwasher. She was accepted without much questioning, was given gloves, a sponge, and told to start work the same day. For 2 months, the girl worked hard, washed and rubbed glasses, washed plates and pans to a shine. One day in the restaurant, a waitress did not come out. The manager burst into the kitchen, took a quick look at Tiana, told her to change, put on an apron, and go out into the hall to serve the guests. The first few days were hard, but the girl took to the task diligently. She quickly mastered the simple craft of waitressing. "You're fast," Gavin once told her. "It would be easier for me to hire a granny at the car wash than to look for an adequate employee in the hall." Things were going well at first, with customers leaving good tips. Tiana bought herself some decent clothes, sent more money to the village, some guests and a supply of medicine for her aunt. And then the black streak began. Then that rag absent-mindedly forgotten in a hurry on one of the tables. Then broken dishes. And now a guest poured wine on the table, and finally Tiana was fired. The girl walked down the night street, wiping her tears. The most frustrating thing was that she had already thought that everything was getting better, spent all the money and did not pay for the room on time. And the owners were waiting for payment and were already looking askew at the young tenant. When Tiana got home, she found another surprise. Her belongings had been piled carelessly into a gym bag and put out into the hallway with an obvious hint. There was no more strength to cry. The paycheck for one shift wouldn't be enough to pay for a month in advance. Tiana didn't grovel after being evicted in absentia. The girl grabbed her bag by the handles, unhooked her keys from the keychain, placed them on the bollard next to her and left. The penetrating October wind blew in her face. She would walk to the train station, and there she would take the first train in the morning to her aunt's village. Cry quietly into her pillow at night, and try again. Each time, though, it was harder and harder, but the health of her family man was more precious to Tiana. Matthew was in a great mood. He had done a good job today. Outside the window, the streetlights, the bright signs, the neon lights of the city in the rain seemed to flow with color. It was even brighter. At night, from the beginning of the shift, the work went as smoothly as possible. There were expensive orders and interesting passengers. Until 6, Matthew discussed with a philosophy professor, laughed with animators in costumes, drove 2 elderly girlfriends to the theater. The guy liked to drive around the city. He felt free and relaxed. Of course, there were some silent passengers, but for some reason they were a minority. The atmosphere in the car apparently disposed even the hardened silent ones to talk. By midnight, the downpour had intensified. Matthew dropped off the last passenger at the edge of town, near the private sector, and decided that it was time to call it a day. He made a leisurely stop at a gas station, picked up a coffee and a sandwich, tipped the gas station attendant, and headed home in a melancholy mood. There were hardly any people on the streets at this late hour, so Matthew was surprised to see a girl walking along the curb. She was soaked through. She was carrying a heavy sports bag in her hands, and her cloak was useless. "Young lady, what are you doing?" "Get in. I'll give you a ride home." The guy stopped and opened the door from the passenger side. "And I have nowhere to go." He heard a completely broken voice. "I don't have a home here, but let me take you somewhere." "The weather's terrible," Matthew insisted. "It's free." He suddenly felt surprisingly sorry for the girl. Not because she was walking alone at night in a downpour, but because Matthew felt a silent call for help. The kind of call you might read in the eyes of a puppy abandoned in a box. "Sit down, please." "I can't leave you here at a time like this." Matthew emphasized the word please very strongly. The stranger, he thought, sighed. Then she skipped over a puddle by the curb and grabbed the door handle. They drove in silence for a while. Matthew turned on the heater to warm the shivering passenger. "How did you end up here?" The boy was the first to ask, and Tiana told him. It was as if she had been saving it all up for months, and now she was out of control. She talked, and Matthew listened until he realized she was crying. "You'll forgive me for sitting here crying like this. It's a terrible shame for you." A stranger, she apologized confusedly as the car stopped at a stoplight. Instead of answering, Matthew pulled some tissues out of the glove compartment. "But why a stranger?" "My name is Matthew." He held out a paper handkerchief to the girl with a smile. "Tanya," she sobbed in response. "Well, now we know each other. Would you like some coffee or tea?" Tanya had no time to answer, as he stopped at another gas station and disappeared in the doorway. 5 minutes later, he handed the girl a hot cup, a small chocolate bar, and threw his jacket from the back seat over her shoulders. They pulled off to the pad to the side. Matthew tried to lighten the mood as best he could, even trying some awkward jokes. This girl's story seemed to him like a mockery of fate, and at the same time he felt a desire to help. It was strange. Matthew wouldn't call himself sentimental or tearful. He didn't give money to beggars, and he wasn't Benjamin. "And now I have nowhere to go. I can hardly afford a hotel. I don't know much about the city." Tanya finished her story, warming her fingers on a hot drink. "Please bring me to the station. If you don't mind, I'll wait for the train there. You'll freeze at the station in your wet clothes. Stay at my place, and tomorrow I'll take you to the station," Matthew said. The words came out of his mouth before he could think about it. He didn't think about his mother or morality at that moment. He wanted from the bottom of his heart to do something good for his accidental passenger. Tanya froze and for the first time truly stared at Matthew in amazement. He nodded silently, with a slight smile, confirming his offer. And Tanya suddenly agreed. Tired, wet, exhausted, she figured she simply had nothing to lose, and so be it. That late evening, Matthew spoke to his mother in a way he had never spoken to her before. Nellie, of course, was against the idea of her apartment acting as a lodging house for unemployed women. However, for the first time, her son did not ingratiate himself to her or ask for permission, but spoke in a voice as firm as a rock. Nellie felt a chill run down her spine. So different from the Matthew she was used to. "She'll clean herself up, and I'll see her off tomorrow morning," he said. "Don't embarrass yourself, Mom. If you can't kick the poor girl out, you'll only embarrass yourself in front of her and the neighbors." Matthew firmly contradicted his mother once more and went downstairs to the car to fetch Tiana. Nellie was quietly seething, but for some reason she couldn't object. Had something about him changed that evening? Something that made the woman, against her will, look at her son differently. The university's chief accountant defiantly closed herself in her bedroom and turned off the lights. Matthew put Tiana in his room and moved to the sofa in the living room. The girl's wet clothes were hung on the backs of chairs and radiators. "Good night to you, Tiana," he said as he closed the door. "Good night to you too." "Thank you," the girl replied, lay back on her pillow, closed her eyes, and for the first time in many days truly smiled. Matthew stood outside the door, wondering what had happened to him today. Was it an attack of pity, compassion, an outburst of emotion, or had his soul reached out to someone unfamiliar but dear, someone in need of protection and care? Early in the morning, Nellie got ready for work. She was offended by her son's behavior. To prove it, she had gotten up at the crack of dawn and decided to go to the university herself, though she was used to Matthew driving her. But principle and resentment were dearer. Nellie examined her guest's old-fashioned coat on the rack by the bathroom, then glanced even more squeamishly at the stale, dirty sneakers. Things in the hallway hinted that she was not noted for her tidiness, her limited means. The woman stepped over the stranger's shoes, deciding to wash the hallway with bleach upon her return, and left. The young men awoke almost simultaneously. Matthew saw through the doorway as Tiana timidly tried to find the bathroom. It was not without some awkwardness. Matthew, like a hospitable host, had even made breakfast. But it was made of sandwiches and tea early in the morning, when he himself dropped the unpretentious dishes. The sandwich landed sausage side down and landed on Tiana's pant leg with a piece of butter. The young people stared at the sad piece of salami on the plate for a few seconds, and then laughed. Matthew felt so relaxed and at the same time at ease with this girl that he hadn't even noticed his mother's absence from the morning. Of course, any awkwardness was gone from the conversation. "Are you on your way to the station?" he asked. They chatted like old friends who hadn't seen each other in years. Tiana had forgotten all about what had happened to her yesterday. It was sunny, just like this sunny city. She told her sudden companion about her childhood at her aunt's house, about how she liked to pick dandelion bouquets in the vegetable garden, about the time she was pecked by a rooster, about her first for dictation. There was no sadness or longing in these stories, only carefree childhood and sincere delight of a child. Matthew listened eagerly, attentive to every word, absorbing these pure emotions, which he almost never got from his mother. With her commanding temperament, she was always dry, not praising, not encouraging, not interested in her son's dreams and discoveries. Nellie was preoccupied with the primary worldly tasks: food, regimen, studies, profession, finances. Matthew had enough friends. Teachers at school loved him. Girls were not shy to make eyes at him. But all this was a trifle compared to what this 19-year-old girl from the village told him today. With simplicity, purity, and trust. They waited for the train together, sitting on the platform. "Thank you very much." "I don't know how to thank you," Tiana said again with some awkwardness as she said goodbye. "It's okay," Matthew dismissed her. "But I do. Let's meet again when you get back and go to the movies. Tiana was a girl from the countryside who had come to the city. She met Matthew and a warm friendship developed between them. Matthew was charmed by Tiana's openness, spontaneity, and cheerfulness, something he lacked in his relationship with his own strict mother, Nellie. When Tiana was leaving, Matthew suggested that they meet again when she came to town and go to a movie. Tiana was happy at the prospect. Upon returning home, Matthew faced the displeasure of Nellie's mother, who considered Tiana a country wench and tried to get rid of any trace of her in the apartment with bleach. A conflict arose, during which Matthew for the first time openly confronted his mother, tired of her excessive control over his life. This situation highlighted the overdue contradictions between Matthew and his mother, Nellie. On the one hand, Nellie cared for her son, but at the same time she was overprotective and tried to impose her rigid attitudes on him. And Matthew, having met Tiana, felt a longing for freedom, lightness, and spontaneity in relationships. This story touches on the themes of growing up, gaining independence, the value of simple human joys, and the ability to assert one's boundaries even in relationships with loved ones. The clash of two life philosophies caused a generational conflict between mother and son. "I'm sick of your control," said Nellie. "I see you've picked up a lot of chutzpah from that hillbilly too." "Better chutzpah than a lifetime of being told what to do by someone else," Matthew said, and slammed the front door so hard that the figurines fell from the table. He slept in the car that night. Such loud arguments with his mother had never happened before. The boy had always held back or avoided sharp edges with cunning, but now something had been hurt that didn't want to put up with the insults. Tiana didn't tell her aunt what had happened. She said she was just visiting for a few days. The perceptive relative immediately noticed that her stepdaughter was unusually joyful. "But Tiana, tell me, did you meet someone?" Aunt Lexi asked at dinner. The girl burst out in surprise and dropped her spoon into her plate, splashing the table. Aunt Lexi laughed. "Ouch. You don't have to answer that. I can already see that I've met a handsome man." Tiana told her named mother about Matthew. "The main thing is that the man is good. You don't see much selfless help these days." Aunt Lexi patted her stepdaughter's shoulder approvingly. "Auntie, I don't think I'm right for him," Tiana said. "And anyway, maybe that's true. I was already dreaming of a house with a rose garden. And if you don't dream, then why live?" The woman was genuinely surprised. "You should have fallen in love a long time ago. In my childhood, there was only school, vegetable garden, chickens. I'm old, you'll be sitting on my neck." "But Auntie, don't say that," Tiana objected. "Who else but me will help you? Youth is for dreaming, for joy, for falling in love. And you are doing a great deal for me. Go and meet him, and I'll give you something to dress up." Aunt Lexi got up and went into her room. From there she heard the noise and creaking of an old closet. Soon the woman returned with 2 stud earrings. "This is what my late husband Alex gave me for my wedding in 1973. Ural emerald, a good luck stone." She placed the jewelry in the palm of the amazed Tiana's hand. The earrings were small, but elegant, even noble. The light green stone played in the sun, shimmering with facets. Aunt Lexi easily pushed Tiana to the mirror to try on the gift, and it was as if the jewelry was made for the girl. The emerald earrings looked even more beautiful against her brown hair. "Well, what's not a bride to be?" "Well done," Aunt Lexi said with a pat on the knee. Tiana laughed and took another sneak peek at herself in the reflection. That same night, Matthew called her himself. They chatted about everything and nothing. For about half an hour, the guy said he'd meet her at the train station. Also that he had a surprise. Tiana exhaled, awkwardly said goodbye, and went to bed, gazing dreamily at the fishnet shadows on the ceiling. Matthew did apologize to Nellie's mother for being rude when he cooled down. Still, the heated atmosphere in the apartment was hitting a nerve. It was amazing how Matthew had been practicing law at the university, operating with articles and laws, arguing with his professors, but he had been unable to defend his opinion to his mother until that day, because she had built her unquestionable rightness and authority into his head. Nellie listened to her son's apology and pretended to accept it too. But the coolness of the relationship betrayed the truth. Perhaps she was a little more critical of her son than usual, as if she were getting back at him for the offense. and he seemed impenetrably indifferent. About his studies, about cars, about passengers at work. Fears and worries. The invisible grit, he shook off his shirt and adjusted the collar of his coat. A worm of worry coiled inside Nellie. Had something changed? Whereas before she could confidently say she knew her Matthew from the get-go, now she couldn't. He was with her, and not with her at the same time. She'd been tempted to ask her son about her concerns several times, but she didn't know how to begin. The control she'd built her life around had been broken. The day of their second meeting was unusually warm for October. The sun was so hot that Tiana had taken off her cloak and was carrying it in her hands. Matthew even wore dark sunglasses, though he hid his eyes, which kept looking at the girl, her hair, her figure, her eyes, the polka dots on her blouse, the neat earrings. Every detail Matthew wanted to memorize and keep. In 3 days he'd missed her so much it felt like they hadn't seen each other in forever. "So what's the surprise?" Tiana asked, tucking an embarrassed strand behind her ear. Matthew nodded enigmatically and took her hand, calmly and confidently at the same time. In that gesture, all the worry, fuss, and concern dissolved. They walked down a long alley littered with yellow maple leaves and found themselves in a pet store. "Do you want to get me a hamster?" Tiana laughed. Matthew only smiled again. "Look here for a moment," he said, and disappeared behind the racks of aquariums. Tiana looked at the strange fish, the funny guinea pigs, and the noisy parrots. She liked the atmosphere, and she had always loved animals. She used to feed the chickens from her hands as a little girl, stroking their feathers, but they only clucked and looked into her face with their bird eyes. Tiana was distracted from her thoughts when through the bars she was playing with a parrot, as green as a young pea. "I see you've already got the hang of it. You've got the hang of it," joked a small woman in an apron with the store's emblem. "Hello, Tiana. My name is Olivia. Can it be Olivia? Matthew told me you were looking for a job." "Aunt Olivia is my best friend Alex's mom," Matthew explained. "And she'd love to have you if you'd like to work for her, of course." Tiana couldn't believe her ears with joy. Yes, I agree. I'm ready to start today," she blurted out. Olivia laughed. "That's the spirit. But today is not necessary. In 2 or 3 days find a place to live, and then call me." She handed Tiana her business card, confused and happy at the same time. Matthew had a few words with the friendly pet store owner, and they walked out. "This is the second time you've helped me?" "I already feel very uncomfortable about it," Tiana said. The girl looked at Matthew. "I didn't do anything," she said, jokingly raising her hands. "A car brought you home to me, and Aunt Oberon took you to work." "Of course she did," Tiana laughed and poked Matthew in the side with a finger of poorly hidden pride. Matthew whooped and laughed and immediately started tickling Tiana in return. They ran down the street like fools, one after another, giggling like schoolboys. Passers-by turned to look at the strange couple. But for them, the world gradually shrank to just each other. "Would you point your finger at me again if I said I'd help you a third time?" Matthew asked when they were out of breath. Tiana opened her mouth but said nothing. "Let's go somewhere," Matthew suggested. "And then we can go to the movies. I think we can make it in time." He looked at his wristwatch. 15 minutes later, the boys pulled up in front of the university dormitory. Matthew was friends with the head of the group, and he got along with the commandant. A small gift, a thank you envelope, a story about a poor relative, and he agreed to let the pseudo-student stay for a month or two. All the more so because Tiana's age was more than suitable. However, the commandant asked her to keep out of sight of the teachers and to come before 22. "Are you a wizard, honestly?" Tiana stared at Matthew as they walked outside with the room key. The boy scrutinized his chin and the back of his head, and then stated with a very serious look. "So no beard, like Hotabike. The magic hat is also missing. Verdict? No, I'm not a wizard." Matthew leaned over to Tiana and whispered conspiratorially. "Well, maybe a little." He made her laugh playfully and cleverly solved in one-day problems that took her weeks to solve. It was beginning to seem to her that the fairy tales her aunt had told her as a child were coming true. "Let's hurry." Matthew took her hand again, firm and gentle at the same time. We have a movie starting in 20 minutes. It was one of the most joyous days of Matthew's life in recent memory. Yes, he'd skipped class today. Yes, he wouldn't go to work tonight. Yes, his mother would freak out if she found out. But why? Right now he feels needed and happy. And happiness is definitely worth a couple unattended lectures and a few missed passengers. Nellie tapped her pencil nervously on her desk. She had given the students an assignment. They sat like mice and wrote, while the instructor was lost in her own thoughts. 15 minutes ago, the department told her that Matthew had skipped class. He hadn't been in class before or after lunch. The helpful group supervisor had even asked Nellie if her son was all right. The woman threw something discreet in response, but inside her a mixture of resentment, frustration, and intense misunderstanding was slowly simmering. Matthew didn't pick up his phone and turned it off altogether. When had she not seen him treat her like that? So what if he became an adult? A mother should be respected at any age. She wants what's best for him to have a future, to become a powerful man, to make a name and a career. Where did it all start? Well, I guess it started with the unfortunate car. Yeah, that was a mistake. She let him, it was her own fault, believing a young man's good intentions. And now she's looking for him in that car. He's out of control. He feels he can do anything. So we've got to get rid of her as soon as possible. And Matthew can go back to being a good student and a good son. And if he wants to work, he can be a paralegal. You can't trust a man, even if it is your own child. She knows what's best. She's lived her life and managed to settle down well only because of her savvy, calculating, and pragmatic nature. So she can beat the crap out of a young guy's head. He'll thank her later, when his classmates are trampling the training ground in their boots. It's Daddy's bad blood. Nellie remembered her father. He, too, had been doing things during their short relationship. At first she'd even liked it, but then it became clear that without organization and discipline, nothing good would come of it. And a little later the beau made it clear what he really wanted. He was noodling about eternal love, encouraging Nellie to register him at her place. She couldn't let Matthew, whom she'd raised all her life, suddenly turn off the well-thought-out path. The weeds of excessive freedom, dubious girlfriends, and the like must be pulled out at the root. The chief accountant was distracted from his thoughts by a call from the class. The students hurriedly began to hand in their papers. Nellie didn't even glance at the stack of papers that piled up in the corner of her desk a couple minutes later. In her mind, she was already creating a plan to save her son and get him back on track. Matthew had come home in a light, uplifted mood, and that made the air sparkle. Nellie's mood was diametrically opposed. "Matthew, is there anything you want to tell me?" she asked, as soon as his son entered the kitchen and began to pour his tea. "No, Mom. Nothing yet." He smiled radiantly at his mother from the other end of the kitchen. "So skipping class isn't enough reason to talk?" Nellie tried to hold back the outrage that was bursting out of her. Matthew's hand hovered in the air, a teaspoonful of sugar. He exhaled, then carefully poured the sugar into the cup and stirred the contents leisurely. "Mom, I'm a grown man. If there are tales on my studies from my absence, I'll deal with them myself. Don't be so nervous." Nellie's calm, measured tone made her son's voice boil even more. "Why are you embarrassing me? Do you want people to point the finger at me for having a truant son?" "No, Mom, you want to make a big deal out of nothing. One day of absenteeism is not the disaster you pictured." Matthew still spoke firmly and calmly, though it cost him some effort. For some reason, after talking to Jenny, he felt more mature, stronger, more confident. The weight that had been weighing on his shoulders since childhood and preventing him from objecting to his parent had dissolved into oblivion. With absenteeism, everything begins. Then women, then stupid adventures. Before you know it, you'll be without a diploma, without a profession, and without a decent place in life, Nellie said. "Mom, stop making such a big deal out of it, please." Matthew sighed tiredly and rubbed his temples. The lightness and the wonderful impression of the day were gone because of this inane interrogation. Nellie, like a horse that had been yanked backwards at the most crucial moment, felt the invisible thread of her control over her son fleeing further and further ahead. "Tell me, why did you skip your classes?" the woman asked. "I went to get my car repaired," Matthew replied. He realized that the truth would make his mother even more furious, so he said the first thing that came into his head. "You think I can't see you're lying?" Nellie threw the towel over her shoulder and put her hands to her sides. "What car?" "I'm old, Matthew, but I'm not crazy." "I've been fixing the car," the guy said expressively, separating his words with pauses. "Give me the keys," Nellie demanded. "I bought this car for you, and I'll take it back." What happened next broke some shudder in the woman's mind. Matthew silently pulled a bundle from his pocket, unhooked the alarm keys from it, and placed them in his mother's palm. Nellie stared at them stupidly somehow. The emotional army looked out from behind them confusedly, not realizing where the enemy had gone. "Take it. Only you can't drive." That's one thing. Matthew began to curl his fingers defiantly. "You can't sell it without the owner's signature." "Me, that's two. In the end, your money, as you say, will rot in the yard, or will become the prey of car thieves when they find a car without an owner for several months. That's three." Nellie stared at him in amazement, gulping for air. Matthew calmly took the keys. Then he came very close and said quietly but seriously, "Don't forget who I'm studying for, even if I occasionally skip classes." The guy took a mug of tea from the table and left the kitchen. The incident was over. The first stage of Nellie's plan had collapsed like a house of cards. She didn't like the job. For the first few weeks, she'd come to it as if it were an out-of-the-way place. Oberon marveled at how quickly the girl grasped everything and even did more on instinct. But the village childhood and her experience in caring for animals had its effect. Tiana quickly realized that she loved these hamsters, and what treats can only be given to parrots. In one day, she sorted through a warehouse of pet food. Then she cleaned 2 old aquariums to a shine which were dusty in the back room. "Well done," praised her store owner. "You can buy new fish if there is room." Tiana was not tired in the slightest. The work did not exhaust her as before. In the evening she came to the dormitory, read books, or looked for information about her furry feathered charges on the net. She didn't want to collapse on the bed and fall asleep. This peculiar training has borne fruit. The customers listened to the girl enthusiastically. When they faced the choice of buying a pet, Tiana sat little mice in the arms of children, showed how to properly catch fish with a net from the aquarium, explained how to teach parrots to talk. Oberon could not be pleased with such a smart and diligent worker. Tiana herself was quietly pleased. She was afraid to rejoice loudly. Everything was going too well in her life. She was used to breaking through, climbing, gnawing her teeth with tears in her eyes. And her aunt said that there were plenty of envious eyes around, and they were not even necessarily acquaintances. That's how you rejoice, and some offended by life lady on the street spit and wishes you nasty things. So it is better to be quiet, but be sure that happiness will not go anywhere. The girl told me how she had settled down. She unobtrusively asked about Matthew, but Tiana did not refuse. They saw each other 2 or 3 times a week. Matthew would stop by her place of work before his shift in a cab. They would sit in the corner of the store like a pair of canaries. Oberon had once scolded Matthew for interfering with Tiana's work, but then waved it off, seeing the boys' glances at each other. Tiana hated to let him go every time, but she was afraid to say so. The range of emotions around Matthew was off the charts. She felt like a fool when he explained some historical facts with an important look. Then she was embarrassed and blushed. If he brought her goodies and small nice gifts, she sank in his eyes as in a cup of fragrant tea. Once he waited for her after the store closed. They drove around town all evening, and then Matthew handed her a neat bouquet. Never had any man treated her so simply and tenderly at the same time, not counting her aunt. But here was different. There was care, a twinge of shyness, a fear of offending, a desire to protect and shelter her under his wing. Tiana could feel it all without words. She'd once tried to start a conversation about thanking him for helping her with her job and housing. But Matthew put his finger to his lips and smiled. She was drawn to him more and more each day. When Tiana went to the village, she missed him especially. She wanted to put her arms around him, snuggle her nose into his chest, and be silent. Smiling in love, she finally remembered that you can live and work not only for someone or for the sake of someone, but also just for yourself. Of course, Tiana never stopped sending her aunt money and worrying about her health. But for the first time, she realized that she could exhale and slow down a bit. That there were simple everyday joys, that you didn't have to run ahead, and sometimes you could even let yourself relax. October was over, and rainy, cold November came, followed by December. But not everyone was in the same gloomy mood. In Matthew's mind, the sun was shining all the time, whether he was in classes or driving to work. Time dragged on, but with Tiana, it flew by like a blink. His mother was behind him, or pretended to be. He didn't really care. Matthew didn't respect or love her any less. He just realized it was time to protect his personal space. Funny how it was only meeting the girl from the village that put things in perspective. Before, he had waited anxiously for his parents' approval and worried about her every no, even though he found an alternative. Matthew also realized that his mother would definitely not approve of his affair with Tiana. Not now, anyway. That's why he hid the girl's presence in every possible way. Why create unnecessary conflicts? When the time came, he'd introduce them for real. Toward the end of the year, every accountant is overwhelmed. You have to make reports, summarize all the documents, add up debit and credit. And, as is always the case, some certificates and forms were missing. Nellie had to send a couple of graduate students to lead the way, and herself to search for the necessary papers. She preferred to do everything in advance. There were enough examples around of those who procrastinated until the last-minute, sleepy students turning in their tails, and young professors cursing the university's bureaucratic system while trying to fill out all the journals in a day before an audit. Why do people have such a lack of respect for numbers? After all, you just have to start and everything in life goes according to plan. Someone will stop being late, someone will find out where most of their money goes, and someone will make an informed decision, Nellie thought. On their head, like a perfectionist, everything was in order. Accounting, Alex's student house. Matthew's shelf was empty. Outwardly, everything was the same, and she couldn't charge anything to her son based on maternal suspicion alone. But that same instinct told her that her son had changed. More precisely, he stopped listening to her. Break. All the shelves in the study. Nellie realized she had to go to the university dormitory. The necessary documents were bound to be there with the commandant. At first, Nellie had thought of sending a young assistant to the dormitory, but then something compelled her to go herself. And, as it turned out, for good reason. As soon as she came around the corner, she saw a familiar car in the parking lot in front of the dormitory. Matthew was standing next to it, reverently embracing a girl in an unremarkable gray jacket, but with a bright green scarf. The head accountant lurked around the corner like a detective. Then she took out her cell phone and snapped a couple of pictures. "So this is the mouse responsible for all my son's changes," the woman whispered, peering at Tiana through the panes of her glasses. At first, Nellie wanted to give her offspring a beating right there in the parking lot. But experience told her to be more subtle. She'd already kept more than one skirt away from her boy. It would be easy to deal with a skirt like that. Nellie even hid her face from all pictures of her son. It seemed to her the most disgusting prank. The woman waited until the couple had left, and with a determined look, she made her way to the commandant's office. "First, I decided to get all the necessary paperwork, and then to nail the guardian of the peace of the dormitory to the wall with personal questions. I've got a truant student who lives here. I want to talk to her." Nellie began from afar as the papers were already in her bag. "Whoever we find will be punished." The commandant, who liked to show off to the faculty on occasion, was keenly interested. True, this did not prevent him from covering student parties and absences for a small payoff. But here's the trouble. I don't remember the name and I've only seen it once, but here's a photo. Help me find this shameless one. Nellie shoved her phone under the commandant's nose, where Tiana's face was clearly visible. He turned up his nose predatorily, but then faltered, like a hound mistaking an empty tin can for a partridge. "Not ours exactly," he shrugged. "What do you say? Why don't you send an inspection down here? Have you had an accounting for a long time?" And repairs. Nellie raised one eyebrow expressively. "I'm a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience." The commandant's eyes flickered. He was choosing the lesser of evils. Considering that some of the public property was written off, or sold, and the pipes and electrics were kept on duct tape and word of honor, he didn't need any inspections. To get the full because of the mess in the dormitory, or to get a little because of the lieutenant, the choice was obvious. "But actually," said the commandant, "she lives in room 302, but it is temporary, at the request of a relative from the village." Only then he realized that the girl in question could not be a student, which meant that she had not been truant. but it was too late. "Apparently the law doesn't apply to you," said Nellie. "Apparently an audit wouldn't hurt after all." The head accountant adjusted her glasses, turned to the door, and walked out. By evening, Nellie knew everything about Tiana: who she was, where she came from, what she was doing in the dormitory, and how she had gotten there. The story of a village girl with no education who was trying desperately to get a foothold in the city had set things straight. The woman realized that she was not wrong in her premonitions. She made a couple of calls and hung up the receiver of the working landline phone on the lever in satisfaction. Matthew looked at the time. It was almost 7 p.m. Tiana would be finishing work in half an hour. The young people agreed to go for a walk. The weather was just right. It was snowing without wind. The city seemed to be covered with a downy shawl. The guy took a couple of cups of coffee, Tiana's favorite chocolate, and went along a familiar route. But going into the store, saw instead of Joy crying girl and consoling her Oberon. "Nothing, Tianushka. I can wait until you get settled again." The kind pet store owner stroked Tiana's back. "What's wrong?" Matthew rushed over to them, not forgetting his coffee, which he nearly spilled. "Everything's gone. They evicted me from the dormitory." Tiana wiped away her tears. "They said only students could live there." "Well, why am I surprised? I'm the one who sat down." Matthew berated himself. "You should have found another place to live a long time ago. Where's the stuff? Is it in the warehouse over there?" Oberon nodded at the door behind the cash register. "It's not your fault," Tiana said. "I'm the one who got too relaxed. Let's go. Let's try to do something." Matthew took the bags from behind the door. "Aunt Abby, if Tiana doesn't work for a couple of days, nothing will happen." "Oh, come on, Matthew." The woman waved her hand. "Well, I'm not human, am I? Of course I'll wait. Besides, you can't throw away such workers." Tiana looked at her employer with grateful eyes, and then at Matthew, who was already holding her jacket. "Come on, Eagles, you've got work to do." Oberon admonished them before they left. The snow was still circling in the air, falling carelessly, dancing. Next to Matthew, Tiana immediately became calmer. He certainly wouldn't let her stay out at night. They got into the car, stowed their bags. "We'll check into a hotel tonight, and tomorrow we'll find you an apartment," he said. "But let's stop by my place. I think I left my car papers in my room. If the police stop me, I don't want to pay a fine." "Sure, let's go." Tiana nodded and unconsciously hugged Matthew's arm. While they reached their destination, they called several hotels and very soon found a free and inexpensive room. They could exhale a little. As the car pulled into the driveway, Tiana's cell phone suddenly rang. She thought that it was the hotel receptionist, so she picked up the phone without looking at the screen. After a couple of minutes, the phone slipped out of her hands and fell on the seat. "What? Who called?" Matthew saw Tiana sit up with a determined face and saw her eyes fill with tears again. "Auntie's been taken to the hospital," Tiana muttered with wooden lips. It was the neighbor who called the ambulance. Matthew pulled her to him and hugged her. "Why is all this coming down on you?" He stroked her hair and felt her shaking with sobs and tears. And Tiana was crying again, only out of helplessness. She had only just begun to believe in miracles as life brought her harshly back to reality. "Matthew, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Calm down. Let's go to your aunt's." "What hospital did they take her to?" Matthew started fumbling in the armrests. "In the meantime, have a drink. Tears won't help, but your eyes will hurt." He took out a plastic bag of pills and a bottle of mineral water. And then what they call a fatal accident happened. Tiana swallowed the pills and began coughing desperately. Matthew, in a panic, rushed to pound the girl's back and search for water around the car. But there was no more. He realized that just a little more, and they would have to go to the hospital for another reason. There was no choice but to go up to the apartment to get a glass of water. Matthew flew into the kitchen without taking off his shoes and immediately met the surprised gaze of Nellie's mother. All she could see was her son rushing back into the hallway with the hair dryer and the glass, and that there was someone coughing desperately. A few seconds later, the eyes of the unofficial mother-in-law and daughter-in-law met, the former's full of contempt, arrogance, and disgust, the latter's frightened and confused. "Why did you bring this here?" Nellie didn't even bother to call Tiana anything other than it. "Mom, can't you see? Is she sick?" Matthew stood up for his friend. "I see." The chief accountant wrinkled her nose squeamishly. "And she wants to get a better job at your expense." Matthew stepped between his mother and Tiana. "You've lost the last vestiges of your humanity with your numbers," he said, putting his back to the girl. "No, son. You've lost your mind." Nellie raised her hand and poked Tiana with her finger. "That girl's just a country girl. She'll move in, get pregnant, saddle you up in our apartment, and make money out of you." Tiana felt dizzy, whether from the fact that she could breathe normally at last, or from the words of this scary woman hitting her like a rod. "I'd rather lose my mind with her than go on living with you on a leash," Matthew said, pulling Tiana close to him. Matthew turned his back to his outraged mother and hugged Tiana, who was trembling with shock. And out they went. To the hospital, the young people drove in silence. The girl no longer had the strength for emotions, and the guy was ashamed in front of her. In the hospital, Tiana barely made her way through the nurses to Aunt Ida's room. The woman was unexpectedly cheerful and was discussing something with another patient. "Auntie?" Tiana looked at her with a mixture of joy and bewilderment. The old woman went into the cellar and slipped on the last step. I went tumbling. Aunt Ida began to tell her story so contagiously cheerful that everyone present involuntarily smiled. I was sitting on a pile of potatoes. My leg was curled up. Somehow my neck, the crown, and the soup fell out. I got up somehow. Our neighbor went into the barn. I called out to her. And that's how I ended up here. "Oh, Aunt Ida. Do you know how to scare?" Tiana laughed and hugged the woman. "It's a sprain. They put a plaster cast on me, covered the abrasions with green, but left them." Aunt Ida nodded at the pile of papers on the nightstand next to Tiana's familiar mother. Tiana was immediately relieved. She was happy that everything had worked out. Neither lost housing nor nasty words could be more important than the love of those closest to her. Matthew's head poked into the room. He was tired of tramping down the hall. Come in, young man." Aunt Ida waved her hand invitingly, a little embarrassed. "Your guests. I've been wanting to meet you for a long time." Tiana introduced them to each other. In a couple of minutes, the conversation was already flowing animatedly. It was so easy and relaxed for all three of them, as if they were not in a hospital room, but on the veranda of a country house on a Saturday sunset. They chatted until the nurse asked the visitors to leave, as the time had passed 22. "We'll come tomorrow," Tiana promised. Come. Just the two of you." Aunt Ida winked at them both approvingly. When Matthew didn't come home the first night, Nellie had treated it as a whim. When Matthew didn't show up the second, third night either, Nellie began to worry. And when one day some of his things disappeared, she realized that the usual order had been broken. In the mind of a woman who had spent her life measuring by numbers, what had happened was incomprehensible. The unfortunate broken cup came to mind. On the fourth day, Nellie caught Matthew in the corridor of the university. "When are you coming home?" she asked him sternly but worriedly. "I'm fine," Mom, Matthew replied distantly and coldly. "Don't be nervous." He pulled his elbow out of his mother's palm and headed off to his next class. Matthew and Tiana rented an apartment. A neighbor looked after the household in the village. There, in that tiny room of an old 5-story building, Matthew felt as cozy and good as he had never felt anywhere else. He already knew that this girl would definitely become his wife. Her inner world, her childlike directness, her marvelous sense of beauty charmed him. Her borscht cutlets could compete with restaurant dishes, an affectionate embrace in the evenings energized and relaxed at the same time. Tiana stopped by Aunt Lexi's hospital every day before work. Tiana had a fiancé. Aunt Lexi laughed. "What a fiancé?" Tiana waved away the beet red Tiana. "I'm old, but I'm not bad." "I see that you both bloom like a flower on a May afternoon," the woman said good-naturedly, patting her stepdaughter on the head. Matthew smiled at the words, for they were true. When Aunt Lexi was discharged, the young men took her to the village. The elderly woman, limping but alert, joked constantly. From that day on, Matthew began going to see her with Tiana almost constantly. He liked the village atmosphere, the peace and tranquility. He had never had any relatives in the countryside, so everything was a wonder. The young man looked at the house and yard with keen interest, zealously brushed the snow, and constantly found something to do that required a man's hand. He changed the faucet, insulated the wiring, rehung the doors on the kitchen cabinets. Walk with the one aunt Lexi elbowed Tiana while standing in the hallway. Tired of planting potatoes and digging beds in the spring, Tiana said, "I'd love to." Matthew crawled out from under the sink with a wrench, and Tiana laughed. Periodically, the couple's idyll in the village or in the apartment was broken by Nellie's phone calls. She asked Matthew to come back, shouted at him, threatened him, begged him, but the boy was adamant. Yes, it was hard to combine studying, working in a cab, and traveling out of town. On weekends, I had to deny myself something to pay the rent. But it was better than living under orders and constant control. "Mom, I'm fine." "Don't be so nervous," Matthew answered with the usual phrases without appealing to his conscience. Neither entreaties nor even tears could make him become comfortable and proper by his mother's standards again. In the end, Matthew began to be at home, but for a tick, and kept his new address a secret. He never refused help, but he kept his distance and continued to assert his personal boundaries. Nellie's anger was replaced by jealousy powerlessness, and it flowed into resentment. Colleagues said different things, who scolded the village girl, who suggested to get away from his son. But all agreed in one thing: at such a young age, so nervous will not do any good. Several months had passed since mid-April. Spring burst into town with cherry blossoms and the scent of the first daffodils. Nellie, though tired, could not fully accept the fact that her son lived apart. One warm day, when the sun was almost summertime, the accountant, returning from work, sat down on a bench in the lilac bushes. Usually Nellie never sat on it with her neighbors, considering it beneath her dignity to watch passers-by. But today her new shoes rubbed her foot, and she had no choice. Daniel, an elderly neighbor, came out of the entryway, leaning on a stick. He was a quiet old man who lived on the first floor, tended the flower beds, fed the birds, and never bothered anyone. "It's a beautiful day today," he greeted Nellie, lifting his old-fashioned hat. "Terrible. My feet are all blistered," she mumbled back. "My son's been on my nerves since winter. Work's a mess. It's not beautiful. Feet will heal. Work is not a wolf. And I can fix my son," Daniel shouted and went about his business. "He left his mother. Dumped her," Nellie grumbled. "I was like you when I was young." Nellie, the neighbor, suddenly changed his tone. "I also scolded my daughter for falling in love early. She married a tailor instead of a military man." Nellie, who had a lot of unfriendly thoughts swirling around in her head, suddenly had them scattering like sparrows from a bush. And nothing. She's graduated from the institute, teaches dancing to kids. Happy. Her eyes are shining. And now I'm happy about my granddaughter, Nellie. I took her to the circus when she was little. Now she's running from school with a certificate. Grandpa. She's all grown up now." Daniel sat down on the bench next to Nellie. "What does this have to do with my son?" she asked in bewilderment. "It has to do with the fact that you have to let your children go in time, that you can't make a bed for them everywhere. So let them make their own mistakes and learn their own way. You want it better, but can he have it better in his head?" The old man looked at Nellie carefully. "How could he know?" the woman began. The old man interrupted her and looked into her eyes clearly, but slightly sternly. "Do you want to see your grandchildren?" There was something in that look that made Nellie's inner rebel surrender, embarrassed, hide in a far corner. "I do," she said, barely audibly. "And if you keep fighting with your son, you won't see it." Daniel folded his hands on the hilt of his cane. "It's about time he flew out of the nest and made his own. Is he a boy? Let's go." Nellie sighed. The elderly neighbor simply and without ceremony revealed the truth that she had feared all her life and did not want to admit that her son would grow up sooner or later, that he would not replace her husband. Life really isn't just about numbers and controlling every event around her. Nellie turned all suitors away, fearing they would take up her living space, and ended up alone. She drove the girls away from her son, and he still chose the one he liked. She did not spare even the students, even though they diligently studied her subjects and were afraid of absences. She only pointed, controlled, criticized, seeking to fill the void in her own soul. No matter how you look at it, it's a beautiful day. Daniel drew in air noisily and shouted happily, pointing to a tree. Look, a tit. He watched the bird with interest. Nellie nodded and smiled. The black and white bird hopped about the branches with a stick in its beak. At one point it dropped its find, made a loud squeak, and then flew to the ground, picked up the wand and flew away with it. Tiana and Matthew gathered in the village in the early morning of May 1st to help Aunt Lexi with chores for the holiday, cleaning up the grounds, planting vegetables. In the evening the plan was kebabs, baked potatoes, and a picnic. The young people had already left the house and were packing their bags with things in the car. Suddenly Matthew was called by a familiar voice. He turned around. "Mom, how are you here?" He was surprised. "I mean, how did you find me?" Tiana froze in front of the car. She was overcome by the echoes of that nasty feeling, when in winter she stood on the doorstep of a stranger's apartment and listened to nasty things about herself. "Old friends helped," Nellie answered. "I wanted to talk about everything that had happened." Her mother's voice was unaccustomedly soft, not dictatorial. There was a hint that she was holding them back. Or maybe it was something else. "Mom, if you're talking about the same thing again, my decision hasn't changed." Matthew grabbed his bag of things. "No, son, Suddenly tears came out of Nellie's voice and she began to wipe them away with her fingers. Tiana and Matthew were hurrying Tiana to get her out of her stupor, and Matthew because he had never seen his mother cry in his life. There were times he wondered if she was even capable of it. The boy hastily put his arm around the woman and began to soothe her. "Don't cry, Mom, everything is fine. What's wrong?" "Oh, Matthew, son, I have so much to tell you." Nellie turned to Tiana, "and to apologize to you. Come with us to the village." Matthew looked at his mother. "We'll rest, we'll sit, we'll get to know everyone. It's a holiday, it's spring." He nodded to Tiana, and she tilted her head in agreement, showing that she supported the idea. Aunt Lexi took the unexpected guest's visit well. Tiana had never told her about what had happened between her and her chosen one's mother, so the acquaintance was easy and relaxed. Nellie and Aunt Lexi found common ground surprisingly quickly and began discussing recipes while sitting at a table in front of the porch. Matthew had pulled the table from the kitchen in anticipation of the evening's gatherings. The women tried to help the young men clean up the grounds, but they only waved their hands. "Why are you staring at your mom like you're seeing her for the first time?" Tiana nudged Matthew lightly with her elbow as they cleaned up last year's dry leaves and branches from the vegetable garden. "I saw her for the first time." The young man leaned his gloved hands on the handle of the rake. "Not a real one. How is this woman different from the one who all my childhood fed me porridge, according to the regimen, scolded me for being 2 minutes late?" By evening, when all the pressing matters were over, the kebabs were fried and the table was set, the small group finally sat down together. Nellie, who had traveled light from the city, covered herself with a fur shawl. Aunt Lexi got the house wine, set out the best appetizers. She'd even laid a festive white tablecloth, which everyone had persistently discouraged her from doing. When, if not tonight, the stubborn hostess diligently straightened the corners and smoothed the pattern in the center. Tiana turned on the antique radio, which, like a grasshopper, stuck its long antenna whiskers out the window, and the chatter of the presenters and retro songs came on. The evening became especially soulful when it got dark, and some smooth melody played on the airwaves. Nellie suddenly rose from the table, glass in hand. "I want to apologize," she began, taking a deep breath. "First and foremost to you, Tiana. I behaved abominably. I apologize for my rudeness, my arrogance. I can see that my son is happy with you, and for any mother, that is what matters most." Tiana smiled with one eye at Nellie's mute question. As she continued, "I want to apologize to you, Matthew. I've tried to be the best mother for you, to replace your father and grandparents. But in this list of duties and discipline, I forgot about the simple moments of warmth, childhood joys, and your dreams. Forgive me, my boy." She discreetly took the napkin from her son's hands and blotted her wet eyes again. "Mother, you'd better stop it." "There's no need to apologize." Matthew took the woman's hand. No, I know what I'm saying," Nellie interrupted him. She looked at Aunt Lexi. "And I want to apologize to you too." "Why should I apologize?" The hostess splayed her hands, nearly knocking over the decanter. "To you and all the people who live in the villages. I always thought of them as second class, uneducated and stupid. I see now that I was terribly mistaken. It was only in my old age that I realized the blinders I'd been wearing all my life." Nellie exhaled and drank all that was in the glass in a gulp. "Oh, what a useless girl you are. We need a vegetable garden, and we have rattles in our hands." Aunt Lexi scolded her. "But since tonight is such an evening, I have something to say, too." Matthew looked around at the crowd. "The first news is that I've been hired as a paralegal. After the semester ends, I'm going to start practicing my profession. The second," he turned to Tiana, who was all animated with anticipation. For her, the news of the paralegal was indeed a surprise. But the real surprises were ahead. "Tiana." Matthew turned to her with his whole body. "I'd like to believe that a girl like you wouldn't give up the humble burden of being a lawyer's wife." That's how it happened that night. "Will you marry me?" Matthew asked. Aunt Lexi opened her mouth in surprise. Nellie let a second wave of tears fall, barely recovering from her loud apology. Tiana stared in amazement at the thin dainty ring in a simple box. "I'll do it with the cab driver's husband," she exclaimed, jumped up and hugged Matthew tightly, not believing what was happening. After the hugs, congratulations, and toasts, they began a loud discussion about the upcoming wedding. Aunt Lexi said the celebration should be a village tradition. Nellie argued with her, insisting on a restaurant. Matthew intervened when the relatives got to the point of discussing the festive table. "No one is getting married yet. It's too early to plan hot salads," he calmly reassured them. "Women should plan ahead," Nellie replied. That's right, Aunt Lexi said. "What if I don't have enough pickles?" Tiana laughed out loud. Everyone else laughed too. It was past midnight when they decided to call it a night. Matthew took his mother into the house. Nellie was tired from the events, the long journey, and the revelations, so she fell asleep, barely touching her pillow. Tiana and Aunt Lexi were clearing the table. The woman suddenly froze as she carried the plates into the house. "What is it, Auntie?" Tiana asked, noticing it. "I told you that Pebble was good luck," sneaky Aunt Lexi said with a sly squint. "Now it's going to decorate the second wedding." Tiana looked at her reflection in the glass of the veranda, where her face was reflected in the bright lantern like a mirror. Her hair and earrings with Ural emeralds glistened. Leaf fall. How Melissa loved it. The wind swirls over the ground, and then yellow and red leaves carpet the autumn ground with color. There's silence all around. Only the rustle of leaves stirs the ear. It is still warm in summer. The sun is shining brightly. Gentle puffy clouds are floating in the clear sky. The young woman sighs heavily. Once she could run and toss up colorful leaves, but now she was confined to a wheelchair. She recalled a recent conversation with the head doctor of the surgical department. Henry had explained in detail to Melissa that she had literally been put back together piece by piece after the accident. The injuries were so severe that the prognosis was still questionable. Not only were her bones damaged, but also her internal organs. The doctor told her and her husband to definitely go to church and pray. It's a miracle she survived. Her husband, on the other hand, only suffered scratches. Jonathan was driving, and the investigation showed that he was the one who caused the accident. The man failed to control the car because he fell asleep. Melissa was also dozing when the car had hit a roadside pole at full speed. Now she had a new course of treatment ahead of her, but now the doctors sent her home for rehabilitation. Jonathan drove his wife in a wheelchair down the alley along the hospital buildings. He looked sullen and guilty. "Don't be upset," Melissa told him softly. "I don't hold a grudge against you. I hope you recover." Jonathan nodded his head and sighed noisily. "I just don't know. You need a nurse now, don't you? I have to work." How are we going to get by without money? But I'll have the first group of disability. That's how we're going to pay for caregiving. There's also a $100,000 settlement. That's good. We're broke. It was the hardest time of Melissa's life. She couldn't do anything on her own, and every movement caused her unbearable pain. The young woman hired a nurse, an attentive, patient woman of her age. Her name was Lillian, and she had a lot of experience and real expertise in caring for such patients. Day after day, Lillian's caregiver pedantically followed the doctor's recommendations. In the morning, hygiene, exercises, breakfast. Then she would take Melissa for a walk. Of course, the patient liked to walk. Outdoors, she could feel like a living person. Melissa loved it when the fresh wind blew on her face and cold, wet snowflakes fell on her palms. She couldn't feel anything in her legs, though, and she couldn't even move them. Henry had told her that there was hope, though, and that eventually she would be able to walk. Melissa was losing faith in that with each passing day. Her nurse reassured her and told her that too little time had passed, so she needed to work hard every day and continue her treatments. Her fortitude impressed the young woman. In the afternoon, Lillian would give Melissa a massage, and in the evening they would go for water treatments. She took pearl baths and charcut showers. Jonathan was at work all day long. At first he spent a lot of time with his wife, but then he became distant and came to their apartment later and later. After the nurse left, Melissa was helpless. She was afraid to talk to her husband because he would get irritated and respond rudely to any request. Very often at night she was thirsty, probably from the large number of pills. Although Lillian left a glass of water on the bedside table, it quickly ran out. One day Melissa asked her husband to help her and bring her a new drink, to which he unleashed a torrent of profanity and insults. "I've had enough of you," he shouted. "Helpless chicken. I want to sleep all day at work and here to serve you. Can't you think of everything when you have a nurse with you?" Jonathan said all this to his wife without getting up from the sofa. He still hadn't brought her any water. Melissa justified her husband's behavior by being tired and worried about their life. Only in this she was deeply mistaken. For a couple of days later, Melissa overheard the terrible conversation that he and his mother were having with each other. The interlocutors thought she was sound asleep because she had taken sleeping pills. They were not shy. Jonathan said Hilary. "From visiting her in the village. She has a house there, and Sister Martha can look after her. She lives sort of in the neighborhood, doesn't work, has more time on her farm. And in the end, it'll be cheaper. A nurse is expensive." "It's not like Melissa's going to die," Jonathan said. "I talked to Dr. Henry, and he said she doesn't stand a chance." "That's true. He gave her a lot of reassurance that she wouldn't do anything. Wouldn't it be better if she did?" "I agree," Jonathan said. "It's a tough time. So that's what I'm telling you. Maybe when Melissa dies, you can have her house in the village. Her parents left it to her. Then I'll give you some money and you can buy yourself a nice 2-bedroom. And have kids again. At least I'll have grandchildren. Now she's lying here like a log, with no future." "Okay," Hilary said. "We'll call Kevin tomorrow, and I'll tell him to take my sister. It's a lot of money for this nurse and procedures, all paid for. It's a shame about the money." Of course, my mother-in-law agreed. "I was already against your marriage. I didn't raise you to look at a wretched woman. I want a happy life for my son, and there are no prospects here." Melissa could hardly hold back her tears when she heard that conversation. Everything inside her was sobbing. What on earth is being done? How can they be so cruel? Jonathan is the one who crippled her. It's all his fault. What a betrayal. She managed to love him after all his deeds. All night long the young woman sobbed into her pillow. And in the morning, when Lillian came and put her in the chair, she decided that she would not stay in this world any longer. And while her nurse was in the kitchen preparing breakfast and lunch, Melissa drank everything in her medicine cabinet. But the experienced Lillian knew what was wrong and called an ambulance in time. Melissa was pumped out. Jonathan and his mother took advantage of her suicide attempt and quickly called the village where her sister lived. "Hey Martha," Jonathan said into the phone. "I can't keep an eye on her all the time. I'm away during the day and at night I want to sleep. That's how your sister is going to end up dead. So if you want to see her alive, take her to the village." Martha was the eldest in the family, and she agreed without hesitation. As Melissa shook in the back seat of the car on the way to the village, she thought back over her life. Pictures of her happy childhood floated before her eyes. A favorite village near a large mixed forest, where they ran as children every day. Caring and loving parents Brandon and Patricia, a strong married couple, economic and hospitable. The Vasilevs' home always smelled of flavorful pies. On the table were treats from their own vegetable garden. Brandon cut down the house himself, big, comfortable, strong. Father loved his daughters very much, always called them beauties. Nature really gifted them with beautiful appearance. Both of them were light blonde, with blue eyes and correct facial features. They had grown up, and to their outer beauty had been added softness, femininity, features inherited from their mother. Melissa remembered her mother stroking her head before bedtime and telling her wonderful stories. Her voice was heartfelt and calm. A mother could convey useful things to her daughters without degrading their dignity. Thus, surrounded by the love of their parents, Martha and Melissa lived a carefree and happy life. But then a great misfortune happened. Their parents died. Ridiculously, but instantly. The two of them were digging a hole on the property for a septic tank. Natural gas escaped, and they both suffocated. Melissa and Martha were now adults and had graduated from high school. But the tragedy took its toll on them. Being without parents is hard at any age, and when you're young, it causes confusion, hopelessness, and despair. There is no readiness for independent life yet, and you want to lean on someone. There is no experience and worldly wisdom. There was no one to ask for advice and help. It was good that Martha and Melissa had been friends since childhood and supported each other in every situation. They were already adults, so the guardianship was not interested in them. The sisters began to lead independent lives. They were hard-working from childhood, and so they were engaged in the household and friendship. They lived soul to soul until Martha fell in love. From the school bench, she was courted by her classmate Leo, red-haired, curly-haired, modest and good-natured guy. He was the first to come to the aid of the sisters when he learned of their family tragedy, and literally every day came to them to help. After all, in a rural house, need a man's strength to clean the stable and draw water from the well. Somewhere something to nail, somewhere to dig beds. Leo, of course, had a burning eye. If the boy had been given a free hand, he would have sat with her all day long, holding her hand. Martha was partial to him, too, though she didn't show her feelings directly. But it was obvious that she liked the boy. Soon Melissa began to notice that the lovers were looking for a private place to be alone. The clever girl, under a plausible pretext, left the house, then in the library, then to former classmates' girlfriends. Tender dates led to the fact that Martha became pregnant, and as usual, they got married. Parents played the young couple a wedding, a wide and generous, rustic wedding. Their house was on the next street over, Melissa recalled. They set tables in the yard that were bursting with rustic treats, potatoes generously sprinkled with dill, fried pork, lard green onions, tomatoes, cucumbers, and popular salads, crab and olivier. All simple, but delicious. What else do you need for a rustic wedding? The groom's family had their own moonshine, and wine, grape, cherry, currant, all natural. Melissa remembered the tart taste of that August night. The scents of herbs and ripe apples wafted around, and then she wished she had been as successful. And the wedding was still going on. The adults began to sing songs, and the young ran to the river. How beautiful it was all around. The long-awaited coolness had descended on the earth, and the water was still warm. Everyone was splashing, joking, and laughing. There were few young people in the village. Many went to the city to study and stayed there. But they came to their parents. That's why there were a lot of young guests at the wedding. It was only later, on weekdays, that the village became empty, and only the echo of barking dogs and passing birds resounded in the neighborhood. Martha and Leo moved into his parents' house. It had 2 entrances, and they were assigned one half, despite their independent married life. They didn't leave Melissa behind, they went to help. And soon an official from the city came to their village to recruit social workers to care for elderly citizens. Melissa went straight to the village council in hopes of getting a job. Hilary, a lady of about 45, looked her upside down and invited her to sit across from her. "What is your education?" she asked. 11 grades, she replied. "I studied without fail. My diploma is good." That you studied well is nice. But here's the thing to work with the elderly. You know, with age, people become irritable, nervous. Can you get along with them? I know them all. It's a small village. You can't treat them without respect. And I was brought up to respect my elders. Well, Melissa, let's get a job. I can see you're a serious and responsible person. So the girl got a job and coped with her duties admirably. The old people loved and waited for her. The store in the village is far away, and lonely people need fresh food every day. And to clean the house, to wash the floors, to apply water, a lot of things are needed. That is why the elderly people were grateful to Melissa and social services for such care. They did not want to leave here. They had been born and they wanted to stay until the last. They were happy that such care was organized for them. Melissa herself didn't want to move anywhere. Everything here was her own. But one day Hillary called and asked Melissa to come to town. There was a competition among social workers. They had to show their talents. The chairman said Melissa could sing and dance well. Me, Hillary? The girl said no. I can only sing Russian folk songs and dances in a simple way. Did anyone teach me to compete? Isn't there anyone better in town? So, my dear, they are looking for nuggets of talent to be bright and interesting, objected Hillary. Don't cross me. Come up with a number, even if it's simple, but with songs and dances. Maybe you won't be chosen for the contest, but you'll perform for the department. Protect your honor. Melissa wasn't used to arguing with her elders, so she accepted the leader's offer without complaint. She hadn't been in the city for a long time, almost 6 months. The last time she'd gone to the clinic for a checkup. And having arrived there, she was surprised by the big changes. In the center, there were several new stores with glass windows, and a new theater had been built. That's where the contestants were selected. The director of the social service center and her 2 deputies were sitting in the hall with an important look, and young girls social workers crowded backstage. Each of them had prepared a number. Melissa's performance was considered banal and simple, and she was not accepted to the contest. She was only worried for nothing. But that day it was impossible to go home. The bus had left. It only made 1 trip a day. Melissa sat down on a bench in the theater square and called the hotel to rent a room until tomorrow. They had booked a 2-bedroom with only 1 bed for her. The girl decided to walk around the city and look around. After all, she hadn't been here often. Walking leisurely through the central square, Melissa didn't notice the lilac evening descending on the land. She stepped out onto the stone sidewalk that ran along the embankment and looked out at the river. The blue water reflected the light of the lanterns. There wasn't a soul around, and only one man sat pensively on a bench. As Melissa passed him, he suddenly said, "Why are you so young alone, afraid of a passerby? It's late." "Yes, I am rarely in the city, so I couldn't deny myself the pleasure of walking its streets," she replied. "And what do you find interesting in our provincial town?" asked the stranger with surprise. "I find a lot of things. Here, after all, civilization, parks, squares, after all, stands with ice cream. And we have only 2 stores for the whole village. Dirt roads, forest trails. I love my hometown, but I'm not averse to city comforts. So why don't you sit down?" A young man looked up at her. There was nothing remarkable about him. And if it weren't for the night and the empty street, Melissa would hardly have noticed him. "Yes, I'm a country girl, not used to your city life. All my life I walk barefoot on the grass, and in summer I disappear in the woods and rivers," the girl admitted. "But why are you sitting here alone?" "So my own mother kicked me out of the house. I did not please her. I do everything wrong. Now she's asleep, and I'm wandering around town." Melissa felt sorry for the stranger. "But if you'll vouch for yourself, let's go back to my place." Sleep over, pay the difference and take the other bed? I've already booked a room." "Let's go," the man agreed. "My name is Jonathan." "What's your name?" "I'm Melissa." It's a rare name. These days it's Angelina, Bogdan, and Brittany. And here it's just Melissa. But what did your parents call you? I have no complaints. I like my name, smiled the girl. It's a beautiful name. I haven't heard it for a long time. Jonathan got up from the bench and gave Melissa his hand. Together they walked to the hotel. The receptionist suggested that the man pay for the room, and he gladly agreed, depositing the money for Melissa, which embarrassed her. They went to bed at midnight in their clothes. In the morning, Melissa woke up to someone kissing her. She opened her eyes and tried to pull away from Jonathan, but he was much stronger. When it was over, Melissa cried bitterly. Well, what do you want? It's no big deal, the man justified himself. You're the one who called me. So I felt sorry for you. I told you I didn't have a place to sleep. I've never been with anyone before. How could you? What's the big deal? A man and a woman in the same room. That's how it could have happened, Jonathan continued. I'm going to report you, Melissa said sharply. Write it down to whomever you want. Jonathan grinned. Who's going to believe you? You invited a man to your room and then you're going to file a report. That's ridiculous. Melissa sighed tiredly and sat up on the bed. She looked at the guy's face and said, You have a mean soul. You took advantage of a naive girl and you're playing the hero. She got up from the bed, went to take a shower, and when she came out, she saw Jonathan stomping around the front door. Well, leave your phone number. I'm not a pig. Let's go out like people, he suggested. That's not much of a hunt, Melissa shrugged. Don't pretend, the young man said indignantly. Let me help you carry your things to the bus. But don't take offense. Listen, you're really like this by nature. I want to humanly, but the charms of the name I do not throw to you. Jonathan did follow her to the bus station and carried her bag with her things. He was persistent and Melissa gave in, leaving him her cell phone. The man called her for the first 2 weeks, always asking for a date in the city. Melissa said no. Then he stopped bothering her, and the girl lived her normal life. She didn't even tell her sister about the incident so as not to upset her. However, a month later, Melissa realized that she was pregnant. Not knowing what to do, she dialed Jonathan's number. Is this the gift you have in store for me? It must be revenge, he said. Why are you so stupid? There are plenty of women around, and he chose a country woman. Satisfied, the man mumbled into Henry's phone. What do you want me to do? I'm not getting rid of the kids, it's a sin. Melissa retorted. Well, if it's a sin, let's get married and have a baby. My mother, Emily, wants grandchildren for a long time. It doesn't matter if you or someone else gives me heirs. Maybe it's for the best. Or I'd never marry. Especially with country blood and milk. Healthy offspring. Can you give birth? City people are all sick. They have a lot of diseases, Jonathan reasoned. So pack your bags and come to the city, I'll meet you. But you have to let me know in advance. All night long, Melissa thought about her fate. She didn't want to live with a man she didn't love, but she didn't want to leave her child without a father either. The young woman gathered everything she needed, prayed in front of the iconostasis, and went to bed. In the morning, she went to the city. As promised, Jonathan met her at the station and immediately took her to his home to his future mother-in-law, Emily. Melissa was startled right from the doorstep. The woman was unattractive, short, crooked-legged, round-faced, and squinty-eyed. On top of that, Emily had an unpleasant, squeaky voice. When she spoke, it sounded like someone was driving metal over glass. The acquaintance was very unpleasant for Melissa. The woman picked on her every word and movement. She said the wrong thing, sat the wrong way, looked the wrong way. In general, she glared at the girl every minute. Without ceremony, Emily told the young people that she would live with them. She sold her apartment and put the money in an account. It'll do them good. After all, young people do not know how to do anything now, and everyone needs order, she said admonitively. She ordered Jonathan and Melissa to share a room. The next morning, Emily said bluntly, "You go find yourself a job. We're not going to feed you. Even though you're carrying my grandchild, you have to provide for yourself. I'm not a millionaire to support you in your old age." Melissa asked Hillary for the same job in the city. And that Hillary found her a place. "I'm all set," she announced happily to Jonathan's mom, Emily. "That's great," she smiled. "Who's going to cook?" "Separate from us. You cook for yourself." Well, maybe I will give you fruits or vegetables and the rest is all on your own. Don't come to me and my son for money. We're only taking you in because you're pregnant, and I'll charge you for utilities. You'll be using them light, water, gas. They're not free. Don't expect charity from me." Emily's greed knew no bounds. Melissa went to the marriage registration with Jonathan herself, having bought herself a dress and a bouquet. There were no guests at all. Jonathan wouldn't even let her friends come. "You live with us now, and by our rules," he told Melissa. "We don't want strangers. If you want to talk to your friend, you can come to her, but I forbid you to invite her." "How unhuman are you?" The girl couldn't stand it. "Well, go where it's human. Who'll take you in when you're pregnant? I don't know who would want you." In the future, Jonathan and Melissa's life was hard to call married. She felt like a total stranger in their home. The slanted glances of her mother-in-law and her constant nagging drove the girl to a frenzy. Once Emily so long mocked the young woman that she ran out of the house and stayed out all night. It was summer, but the weather was cold. Melissa caught a cold and ended up in the hospital. As a result, she had a miscarriage. Not only was she physically ill, but Jonathan and her mother were harassing her. "We took you in, and you didn't save our offspring. You ran off to some unknown place." The mother-in-law nodded, ranting to the whole hospital. "She brought you some fruit." She tossed a net of apples carelessly onto the nightstand. Melissa silently turned her back to the wall and felt hot tears burning her face. Melissa never touched her mother-in-law's treat. The apples seemed poisoned by the poison that came from Emily's soul. A few months later, there was an accident, followed by a terrible conversation where mother and son discussed Melissa as an unnecessary thing. It was disgusting. And now Melissa was on her way to her ancestral home. Jonathan gave her a dry goodbye, and he didn't even get out of the car to help Martha put his wife in the stroller. Melissa was greatly relieved when her sister brought her into the bedroom. The young woman smiled. Everything was just as it had been before, her childhood drawings and the big pink teddy bear on the bed. Martha had cleaned the entire house, and its smells brought a peacefulness to Melissa's soul. Insulted and humiliated, she cried quietly. "Thank you, sis, for caring," Melissa sobbed. "What would I do without you?" Martha put her arm around Melissa's shoulders and sobbed. "What kind of people are they? Married them. Now they want to get rid of them." "I haven't told you everything," the young woman sighed. And she told her sister the truth about the night at the hotel. "Why didn't you say anything, silly? You could see right away that the man was rotten. Why did you get involved with him? We could have helped you and Leo. We'd have helped you raise your child. Better alone than with such a despicable man." "That's right," Melissa agreed. "I was wrong. I didn't see the meanness in him. I thought he was just a weak man, like a man no one wanted. But he and his mother were in cahoots, and it got to the point where they'd be happy to dance on my bones at my grave. And they are not poor. They don't need anything. They live in a comfortable apartment, dress fashionably, eat well, but they dream about the death of a man so that they have more money." "Melissa, don't worry. What happens now happens now. We'll help you with everything. When Leo comes back, we'll be better off. I just wish I could wait for him," Martha sputtered and sat down on a stool. But her hopes were not to be realized. One day, the connection with Leo was cut off for several weeks. The woman had been worried sick, calling and writing to every authority. It seemed to Melissa that Sister Martha would go mad. She loved her husband Leo very much, and had 3 children by him. They lived peacefully, amicably, cheerfully. They got along with his parents, waited for Leo to come home together. Then came the sad news. The whole village gathered for the funeral. The women were in tears, and the men were standing, freezing in their hats. They were all of age and had great respect for the late Matthew. He was a good man and a great professional, worked in the village motor pool. There used to be all sorts of things, SUVs and tractors. Now it's just 2 old dump trucks and a van. But everyone used Matthew's services and brought their personal vehicles in for repairs, and he never turned anyone down. He realized that in such remoteness from the city you can't do without cars. Leo's parents grieved for a long time. Martha had become very thin and was not herself. The children all circled around Melissa. Almost all day long they were in her house. She did homework with them, helped prepare meals. Martha would come, put her sister in the stroller, silently feed the chickens and ducks, and then come to the outskirts and stare at the woods and fields, weeping quietly. None of her relatives touched her. They understood that it took time to get over such grief. Slowly the woman withdrew a little, began to be included in the household and in the upbringing of children. Days flowed again with their succession. The forest was ablaze with bright colors. The last days of September brought warmth to the village. Melissa was often in the woods in the afternoons. She wanted to be alone, to breathe the crystal air, to enjoy the silence. One day she met a strange man on the forest path. The girl was surprised strangers didn't come here. "Halt," she shouted, limping, to the stranger in the back, and he turned around. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a bronze-tanned, strong-willed face. "Hello, are you on patrol around the property?" he asked peacefully. "Hello." "No," Melissa smiled. "It's just rare to see anyone in our forest." "Aren't you afraid? What if I have bad intentions? And you're alone in the middle of nowhere?" "What could I be afraid of in my position?" Melissa nodded at the stroller. "You're wrong. There are worse things to do. I'm looking for Martha Smith. You don't know her?" "I don't know her. She's my own sister." "Oh, great. I'm a friend of her husband Leo's. I came to visit you." "You knew Leo well?" "Well, let's go quickly. We really need you because your stories tell us he's alive." On the way, Rick, as the man introduced himself, told Melissa that he'd been wounded in the war. He told her that he and Leo were friends. Leo's parents listened with bowed heads, and the children kept their eyes on the man, eagerly catching his every word. "Your father, son, and husband was a hero. And he told me a lot about you. I know that Samantha likes to sleep before dinner," he said, glancing affectionately at a skinny girl of 9. "And the younger ones, Peter and Cheryl, go to the river in the summer without being asked." That's right, the children chorused, one and all with fiery red hair and freckled faces. "That's how I remember Leo too, with his cheerful freckles and bright green eyes. They are the epitome of him and all in his father." The man lived his life for a reason. He left such children, Rick thought to himself. He was with you all the way, wasn't he? Of course he wanted to come back, the man sighed, but it didn't come true. "So I came here to help you. That was our agreement. He must have sensed his own demise. He asked me to come to help his wife, his parents, his children. So Martha, give me everything you need for the household. Don't be shy, tell me. I'm a carpenter. I can cook a little, and I'm not afraid of any labor." "Thank you. It's a little cramped in here, though. But you can stay with Melissa's sister, Martha. It's a big house, and she won't be so scared." "She doesn't want to move in with us. She's kind of shy," Rick smiled broadly, glancing toward Melissa. "I don't even think that girl's afraid of hell. Let's go." Melissa beckoned him to follow. Rick hefted the travel bag onto his powerful shoulders and followed. He watched as the young girl deftly handled the wheelchair. When he reached Melissa's house, Rick couldn't contain his admiration. What a beauty. The man admired the carved ornaments on the structure. The hands of a master. Who has such golden hands? "My late father's," Melissa replied. "That was a master." Rick's eyes sparkled with delight. The young woman looked up at him and marveled at the mighty strength of her new acquaintance. For some reason, she was not afraid of the presence of a strange man in the house. On the contrary, she felt protected. Every morning, the girl went out in a wheelchair into the yard and watched with amusement as the stern, silent Rick fed the birds in their backyard. He wasn't squeamish about making breakfast for Melissa. However, the man made it a condition that he would buy all the food himself and with his own money. He did not accept any objections. For the first time in her life, Melissa caught herself thinking that it felt good to accept help. Rick's whole demeanor was calm and eager to be helpful. He took her into the woods every day, and Melissa showed him the places where they had played with their peers as children. Immediately, a smile appeared on her face. They chose different routes, admired nature, picked mushrooms and berries. It was also customary for them to go for an evening walk, have dinner on the riverbank, and talk. It was the only thing that made Melissa feel so unfit to be a woman. Ah, if only she could be the same. How much happiness she could give this man. Sometimes Melissa felt homesick and would sneak away from home. One day, after a rainstorm, the young woman got stuck in the mud and tried in vain to get out. The girl cried, put her hands on her knees, and froze. "Let me stay here in the woods. I'll only disturb everyone anyway," she whispered. Then she felt someone push her wheelchair and it rolled easily out of the mire. Melissa turned and saw that it was Rick. Suddenly she realized that she wasn't ashamed to accept his help. After all, there was no pity in this man's eyes that she had so often seen in other people. His gaze radiated warmth and calmness. Here he knew for sure that one must live, no matter what. "I'm sorry," Melissa said. "I'm just a little homesick." "I understand," the man nodded. At that moment she realized that she was not indifferent to him. Some unknown pinching feeling enveloped every cell of her body, and Rick was getting more and more used to Melissa. She was afraid every day that he would leave, but he wasn't going to. "I've got money, a fridge full of groceries," he said. "Leo, fix the car. We can go to the city in peace. I'll stay with you for now." Martha was sneaking conversations with Rick too. She liked everything about him, but she saw the beginnings of true love in her sister's heart. "Melissa?" Martha asked. "No, I can see that she's attached, but I'm afraid there's no future for you two. I can see that you like each other, but she's a cripple." "And you don't give up," Rick said firmly. "You said the doctor gave her hope." "Well, she's just a little girl," Martha countered. "That's good. You know how miracles happen?" Rick remarked. "You probably know better than I do, having seen more than I have. But let's all do our best. Let's follow the recommendations to the end, and then we'll see." Rick's words encouraged Martha and gave her faith in her sister's recovery. She diligently began to do exercises with her every day and invited a witch doctor from the village, who was famous throughout the area. Abigail, the old witch doctor, tall and sturdy, came to Melissa's house every day and carefully kneaded her lower back and limbs. What she was doing was unclear. Her methodology remained a mystery. But after 3 months, Melissa's feet were moving, and after 5 months, leaning on Rick's arm, she was walking in the pine forest to her favorite places. They were timid steps, and it took them hours to get there, carrying the chair with them. When the young woman grew tired, she would transfer to the chair and Rick would roll her along the forest trails with the breeze. Still, she felt like a normal person now, and she even had plans for the future. "Rick, I'm so grateful to you and Kevin and Abigail," Melissa said. "I honestly didn't think I'd ever stand on my own 2 feet. Now that I'm stronger, I'd like to do something useful." "You can't even do chores yet," Rick said. "I've got an idea I'd like to share with you. I've got a lot of money saved up, and I don't want to spend it. I used to be a carpenter. My business was good. I had an excellent labor teacher at school. He taught me how to make doors, tables, and chairs. I'd like to suggest that you set up a workshop in one of the rooms. We only have 2, but there's 6 of them. Your father set it up. Is there room? And you'll be my assistant, taking orders, keeping accounts. How's that sound?" "Great," Melissa said. "I'm all for it. How do I repay you for your concern?" "Oh, come on," Rick stopped her. "I didn't start this to thank you. I'm happy with the decision myself. And don't you dare make any bows. But what I offered you, I can do. Let's do it together." And in a month, both of them were already working in the village workshop. The demand was great. It was far from the city. Deliveries were expensive. And here everything was close by. And Rick was an excellent craftsman. Good workmanship went fast. Sometimes, though, they worked late, but willingly. One day the young men made a day off, took fishing rods, and went to the river. The bite that day was excellent. Rick and Melissa competed, who has faster buckets filled with beautiful fish. And the girl won. She jumped up and down with joy and teased Rick a little. "You've got to be more agile. And you're standing there thinking about something you don't know what you're thinking about. Tell me, what are you thinking about?" The man put the fishing rod on the ground, came closer to her, and gently put his arm around her waist. He looked Melissa in the eyes and said, "You and I have been together for 6 months now, living in the same house. And I realize that I really need you, but I think it's time to make this relationship official. How do you feel about that?" Melissa was a little confused. She wrapped her slender arms around his neck and nestled her lips against his. So they stood by the quiet river and kissed to the birdsong. They embraced in silence, which was broken only by the occasional splashes of frogs jumping into the water. "I wouldn't be away from you for a moment," the young woman smiled. "But what about my marriage?" She sighed. "How? What to do?" Rick was surprised. "Divorce. That's understandable. But I don't want to see that traitor, that cruel man." "Yes, now everything can be done in absentia, and you'll be divorced quickly. I'll give you the money." "Yeah, thanks. I'm going to be examined soon. Of course, they'll take away my disability and my benefits will stop. So I'll take it. I'll take yours, Rick." "So what? I don't care about the benefits. You and me, we're doing good. We got a house. It's so beautiful, it's breathtaking. Your sister's around, your nephews too. We'll get our own." Rick gave Melissa a playful look. "How would you like that?" "Yeah, I'd love to," Melissa smiled. "Then let's pack up and go." And holding hands, the happy young people headed home. Rick stirred in his sleep. He opened his eyes and looked at Melissa sleeping next to him. Carelessly throwing on a sheet, he stepped out into the yard and froze, listening to the crickets singing. After an outdoor shower with wet, fierce hair, he made his way to the kitchen to boil the kettle, holding the steaming knob in his hand. He walked to the window. Beyond it was a thick night and a clear sky studded with stars. In an instant, the room was filled with the smells of the passing summer. He took a sip of tea, set the cup on the windowsill, and returned to the bedroom. And the next day a big surprise awaited them. In the afternoon, someone knocked loudly on the door. Rick was sound asleep. Melissa wrapped herself in a sheet and went to open the door. Jonathan stood on the doorstep. He stared at his wife in surprise. Before him was a beautiful Melissa, with a blush playing on her cheeks. Melissa stood on her feet. "How's that?" He'd already backed up. "Were you even in the chair?" Melissa took a bold step toward him. She held her head up proudly as she stepped through the door. "I have. I did." "And you're not happy about my health?" Rick came out of the door. Jonathan was surprised. "She's already got a boyfriend. That's not nice." "When he was alive, maybe." "Was it good for a wife to leave a sick man to his fate?" Rick asked angrily. "What business is it of yours?" "Who the hell are you?" "Me? I'm a normal guy," Rick said. He walked over to Melissa and put his arm around her shoulders. "You're a cowardly, sneaky bitch. You don't you dare insult me." Jonathan forbade it. "So who is insulting you?" Rick replied calmly. "I'm telling the truth. The fact of the matter is everything. You married her and took responsibility for her. And then you abandoned her like a useless thing and ran away. What? Are you here for the inheritance now? I thought she was dead asleep. Here, have a bite." Rick gave Jonathan the finger. "Live and breathe. Get out to here. Wait for the court notice. She'll file for divorce." Jonathan looked up at them, his eyes wide with fear, and no remorse. He turned and walked away. The young people watched him until the man's figure became a tiny dot on the horizon. "Let him go. It's a kilometer to the bus," Rick grinned, pulling Melissa close to him. He'd wasted a ride, and the earth bears them. They stood huddled close together. A tall, strong man held in his arms a fragile woman who was a head shorter than his chosen one, and seemed defenseless in his powerful arms. Their souls were filled with happiness. These two knew what life was all about. After pain, suffering, and despair, they finally tasted the sweet fruits of existence. And Jonathan returned to town penniless. But soon Emily got what she wanted. She was just delighted that she finally got rid of the unwanted daughter-in-law and was waiting for her son to find a normal girl. It is only necessary to restrain the son, so that he knew his chosen one did not offer his hand and heart yet, to look closely. Clearly, the man in the city needs a woman, but let them live in a civil marriage, just as the woman had planned. To her great joy, Jonathan soon had an affair with a female co-worker at work. He had long worked as a stagehand in the city theater. And then leading actress Samantha had her eye on him. That was something to be proud of. The theater actress was a media personality by provincial standards. Everyone in town knew her and said hello when they met her. Not like Melissa, a country girl, married and ugly, naive, stupid and clueless about life. Samantha was the complete opposite of her grasping, stubborn and cunning. She's the kind of woman who'll make Jonathan's life worth living. She knew life, and she wouldn't be lost. But Emily's joy was short-lived. The chosen one of her son turned out to be a cruel and very selfish person. At first, they both could not breathe on her, and as if they did not notice the arrogance and sharpness of the woman. She made it clear to Jonathan's mother that she did not need any advice, and that the man would obey only her. And a little later completely dumbfounded the elderly woman, announcing that she had to move out of the apartment and leave them to live together. After entering high society, Samantha mocked borscht and cutlets Jonathan's mother, considering them a relic of the past. She would not go near the stove at all, she was just squeamish about it. So she and Jonathan ate at cafes and restaurants, which cost a lot of money. When Emily hinted at this, Samantha gave her a scornful look and said, "Mother, don't meddle in our affairs. We can do without you. I, thank God, earned good money and can afford to eat properly. Do you want me, the prima donna of the theater, to walk around with such a manicure?" She stretched forward a well-groomed, graceful hand with a perfect manicure. Washing pots and pans or peeling potatoes. You don't get it, do you? Don't you realize who you're dealing with? Do you think I'm a dumb housewife or a great actress who gets applause all over town? So Mom, drop the insinuations and get on with your life. Can't you see you're dealing with adults? You want to run this place? It won't work with me. But Jonathan likes home-cooked food, Emily tried to object. He loved it before me. And now we're going to be watching calories and waist size. I signed Jonathan up for the gym. Let him watch his figure. The elderly woman clutched her head. You have to go to the gym after a hard day's work. She's totally draining my son. Samantha kept Jonathan under her thumb, and he could only go out with his mother under her supervision. She thought it was best to keep her common-law husband away from dangerous influences. Emily had to rent an apartment. She felt like an exile there. Her son did not come to her at all, not even for dinner, let alone for help, such as moving furniture or taking a broken washing machine to the repair shop. One day she tried to complain about this to Samantha. She replied, "I'll give you the number of a handyman who comes to your house to fix machines. And there's a cleaning and domestic help agency. Google it, Emily, it's all on the internet. It's not hard work, you'll find the contacts yourself." But how will I pay for these services? The pension is small, she asked. What's my concern? What's my concern? I have my own mother, a very independent lady. But you won't let my son help me, cried the lonely woman. Why not? It's just that he doesn't want to go himself. He's got a lot to do. And he has to go to the gym. What does he live for? If he doesn't pay attention to me, how many men will be around? I'm very attractive. Yes, you are, Emily thought. God sent that lady. She had to watch her favorite son care for the welfare of his beloved, to earn money for cafes and restaurants. After work, he worked part-time as a loader and janitor. Samantha did not lift a finger so as not to spoil the image of a social diva. She only bought expensive clothes and shine at receptions. To Jonathan, she slowly gave strict instructions on housekeeping. He cleaned, grocery shopped, cooked, and did her laundry if she was lazy. Samantha had her own life trajectory: spas, fitness centers, coffee with friends, play rehearsals, touring. It began to dawn on Emily that such a woman was unlikely to want to give birth, and she would be left without grandchildren. One day she asked Samantha a question on the subject. "Are you trying to make me a performer?" "Oh, really? Can't you see I don't want to spend money on other people? Who's going to stay up all night and take care of these kids? I have no time at all." But it's the continuation of the family, the thread. You have to love someone. You have to love yourself first of all. Samantha, the prima donna of the theater, replied instructively. After these words, Emily walked around offended and tried to tell Jonathan. "Son, I wanted us to live together and run the household. I'd babysit my grandchildren. I'd even sell my car to do it. And now I've been kicked out of my apartment. That woman has a lot of power over you." Not only did she kick me out, but she's exploiting you. Don't be so dramatic, Jonathan waved her away irritably. Samantha is a smart woman, and she's doing the right thing. I thought I'd be there to help you. I'll cook somewhere, clean up, and when the grandchildren come, I'll babysit. What grandchildren? What are you talking about? Samantha has a career, fame. We still want to live for ourselves, and a housekeeper would do a much better job. We're thinking about getting one now. You can get sick or get in the wrong places. From her, we can demand to do what is necessary, talk strictly, not ceremonious. And we can ask her out the door at any time if she gets fed up. That's what they asked me to do, Emily complained to her son, sobbing. Well, you have some savings. Buy yourself an apartment. After all, I'm an adult and should live separately. Or how do I do with you, if you yourself did not want to go anywhere? At least on weekends I can walk with you in the park. We're busy on weekends. I don't have time to go out. I don't have time on weekdays to be with my wife and go out with you. It's petty grudges and tears. Emily couldn't help herself. You'll feel what it's like to be ignored by your own people. Stop cursing at me. Jonathan was outraged. Go do your own thing and leave me alone. You should have had more children. You'd be traveling around with them, and you wouldn't have the time to worry about the attention. Life would have been peaceful. Is this the thanks you get, son, for all I've done for you? I didn't ask you to do anything for me. Maybe you still need to do the honors? Jonathan replied. Samantha wants to officially marry me. I'll marry her, and then I'll be good and happy. Oh, you will be, Emily lamented. And you've already gotten into it with Samantha. Well, I'm sorry, but I have to agree with you on this one. I never loved her. I just picked her up out of pity. But now I'm crazy about Samantha. We don't need your advice. I'd appreciate it if you'd stay out of my family. I'm not giving Samantha to anyone. Finally, a woman like that. Emily sighed heavily and left. She'd gotten used to being alone, but she couldn't fully accept it. 1,000 times she regretted that she had treated poorly the simple country girl who was willing to do anything to make her son happy. It came to her that a boomerang had come into her life. She had kicked out. She had been kicked out. She had offended. Now she was being offended. There was nothing she could do against Samantha. That woman would not let anything get in her way. The only hope was that Jonathan would someday get bored with Samantha and leave her. And that prospect didn't take long to materialize. As soon as Samantha was courted by the mayor's son and offered to marry her, she immediately threw Jonathan out of her heart and soul. Emily returned to the apartment to help and support the man. But he fell into a drunkenness and only waved his mother away. It's all your fault. All meddled, Samantha annoyed. That's why she left in the end. The son quit his job and plunged into a long drunkenness. A bad habit took over him. And he almost 6 months did not part with a drink, quit the theater, saying that he cannot every day to see the former. Jonathan didn't get a new job. It was hard to live on one pension, but to all the requests of his mother he remained deaf. When Emily got tired of her son's loneliness and inattention, she took the advice of a neighbor who spent all day on a dating site. She always told her that you should not wait for a miracle, and you need to create it yourself. So the woman decided to register on such a resource. Going through the photos of candidates, she stopped at one man. It was a handsome man who looked about 70 years old. Of course, under the photo was the age of 57. Likes to embellish, the woman thought. But that was okay. It wasn't that scary. The man attracted her by the fact that he did not put forward a long list of requirements. He simply wrote that he was looking for someone close in spirit, so that they would be good together. Emily was the first to take the initiative and texted him, "Let's date." The man was cautious and at first tactfully asked her about her interests and told her about his hobbies himself. She liked that their conversations were only about pleasant subjects. So Emily found information that an exhibition of rare fruit trees was touring the city and invited the man there. He gladly agreed. The date was set at the front entrance of the local history museum, where the exotic exhibition was brought. The day before, Emily seriously engaged in her appearance, went to the hairdresser, did a manicure, and then went to a beautician. All these procedures helped her look 5 years younger. Dressed in a modern new blouse and a long leather skirt, she looked great. Even the drunken Jonathan, who had fallen out of the door of his room, sobered up for a moment, and stared at his mother in bewilderment. "Where are you dressed up? You think you're going to sneak away from me?" "No. Mother ruined my private life, and I'll ruin it for you." Emily had no doubt about that. Her son considered her the culprit of all his troubles and tried to take revenge in every possible way. He spat, taking food from her hands, constantly demanded money, and insulted the woman every day. Stepping outside, Emily breathed a sigh of relief. At least this way she could forget about her complicated relationship with Jonathan. The neighbors sitting on the bench looked at her in surprise. "Where are you going so dressed up, Emily?" "Out for a walk." The woman waved them away. She was looking forward to seeing them again, and had been imagining what it would be like all along the way. So she was a little taken aback when she saw her chosen one in a pair of worn jeans, a stale shirt, and a wrinkled jacket. But immediately she restrained herself, justifying it by the fact that after all he was a single man. There were no women's hands in the house. That's why he was like that. But at the museum, Oliver surprised her too. In correspondence, he indicated that he was fond of gardening, and at the exhibition only did what he was looking at visitors, especially young women. She excused him, saying it was just curiosity and nothing more. When they left the building, he didn't invite her to a cafe or a park, but went straight to his house. Emily, who was hungry for male attention, immediately agreed. His apartment was small, but tastefully furnished. The furniture was inexpensive, but good. In courtship, the man was experienced. He immediately took out a bottle of champagne, fruit and candy from the refrigerator. He set it all down in front of Emily. She became intoxicated by his concern and accepted the advances. After a couple glasses of champagne, the woman decided not to let the initiative out of her hands and offered to dance. She passionately kissed the bow and waited for the same response. Instead, she received a certain coldness. The man somewhat distanced himself and explained it by the fact that, say, there was no need to hurry, we need to get to know each other well, and then allow themselves all sorts of liberties. After that, he called a cab and sent his lady home. The next day, Emily waited tensely for a call from her admirer, and Oliver did call her and offered to meet on her property. She quickly agreed and began to think of somewhere to take her son out for that time. Jonathan was just in a state where he could take care of himself. So she sent Jonathan to her Aunt Tyr's house in the countryside and gave him money for a drink. After seeing her son off on the train, she came home and cleaned the whole apartment. Then she took care of herself, took a bath. She seemed to use exquisite creams and perfumes. And of course, she got busy preparing the treats. When the guest arrived, the table was bursting with viands, chops with pineapple, hearty salads with mayonnaise, meat cuts. The woman spent her entire pension on this treat. The only money left in her purse was for bread. This time Oliver came to her very dressed up, in a perfect evening suit and a white shirt and tie. In his hands he held a large bouquet of scarlet roses. The whole evening the man did nothing but compliment her on what a wonderful hostess she was, a dazzling beauty and a wonderful conversationalist. After dinner, Emily tried to get close to the man again, turned on some lyrical music and sat next to him on the couch. Oliver's reaction to her proximity was very strange. He jumped up sharply and said that he had to go home. He said that his close relative was coming from a distant land and that he had to get ready. The woman was discouraged, but took the man's problem with understanding and let him go. He said goodbye and promised that he would call her tomorrow and make a date with her. Emily was insanely happy that their relationship was continuing. It meant that Oliver liked her. Late that night, Jonathan returned from his trip and told her how his meeting with Aunt Thera had gone. He could barely stay on his feet. Oliver didn't call the next day, though Emily kept her cell phone ringing. In the light of the past events, she thought that she was in heaven, and the meeting with a new acquaintance will never happen. But the woman reassured herself there is no telling what kind of health problems can be at such an age. And moreover, the relatives came to visit. It's just that the man has no time for me. What was her surprise when the next morning she woke up to the fact that someone unceremoniously pounded her door with his fist. She jumped up, threw on her robe, and ran to the peephole to see that it was Oliver. "Sorry to be here so early," he said. "I need to see you." Relieved that the man had missed her, Emily swung the door open and let him in. He walked across the carpet into the hall in his boots and sank tiredly onto the couch. The woman sat down beside him and placed her hand on his. "Well, tell me what happened to you," she asked. The man twitched his hand and stared at her in silence. Emily realized she was being impolite and offered him tea or coffee. Oliver nodded silently, and the woman went into the kitchen. When she came into the room with a cup of steaming, fragrant coffee, she found the man sleeping on her couch with his booted feet tucked under him. She couldn't understand what was going on, but she didn't bother to wake her guest. For once a man was in her apartment. She'd divorced Jonathan's father when he was a year old. He'd been going out, picking women younger than him, and this was such a nice man. Something extraordinary must have happened. Maybe a fight with the family, maybe something else. Pity overwhelmed Emily's heart. She covered her beau with a warm, clean blanket and left the room. He woke up immediately, didn't explain anything, but asked to stay in the apartment for a few days. Emily warned him that she had a son and that he drank. Oliver didn't let that stop him. He was determined to stay with Emily. Despite the negativity coming from Jonathan, the man showed the most positive side of himself. He was polite, tactfully adapted in everyday life, and also proved to be a good lover. At his age, and Emily was overjoyed. How lucky she was. A few days later, Oliver asked her to go to his apartment to get his things. It turned out that it was rented and had to be vacated. The woman was very happy that her beloved decided to finally move in with her. All day she fussed, cooked a delicious dinner, and held educational conversations with her son. But her happiness had the opposite effect on Jonathan. He was angry and cursed. "Jonathan, let me buy you an apartment," Emily said. "I may only have enough for a one-bedroom now, but it's yours." "Well, you can go back to your one-bedroom. Where am I going to stay?" "I have every right to stay," replied the son. Emily was struggling with the housing issue and decided to discuss it with her boyfriend. She called Oliver and explained that her home had long been a gift to her son, and he didn't want to leave it, and she didn't have enough money to buy a new one. He turned out to be a wise man and offered to wait, promising to be there in person soon. By evening, however, Oliver had not shown up, and calls to his number had no effect. Emily lay awake at the window all night. Jonathan noticed her agitation and said wryly, "You have done so much evil to people in life that you will not be happy. Will not come your sick. And you, Santa, are you clean?" The woman couldn't stand it, just white and fluffy. "We started the car together, so don't play the victim." "She's happy now." Jonathan laughed. "We are bred and we are from fate and retribution. Stop imagining what we have done. We both didn't like her. It's called mother use. We treated her like a thing and did nothing wrong." "No, let's face it," he announced, pouring himself a glass of vodka. "Only I can pour it all away, and you'll have to live with it for the rest of your life." "Get out of here," Emily ordered. "Leave me alone. It's hard enough as it is." The next morning the woman was not herself from the excitement of the experience, did not find a place. It seemed to her that something irreparable had happened to Oliver. She decided to go to his old address and find out everything. Maybe the man needed help. The door of his apartment was opened by a young and very beautiful woman. She had a slender figure, large breasts and wide hips. With her legs spread wide, the bright brunette was smoking a cigarette. "Who are you here to see?" she asked Emily. "I'm here to see Oliver. I'm looking for him. He's missing. He used to live here, rented an apartment. Maybe you know something?" Suddenly, the woman burst out laughing. "Of course I know everything about him, because I'm his wife. Of course. I wonder who you are." Emily was stunned. She felt so dizzy that she leaned against the wall and moved back toward the elevator. "Hey, who are you? Why are you showing up in the morning, bothering people?" she heard herself say. The feeling of humiliation was so strong that the woman could not control herself and began to sob. The old ladies gathered in the courtyard looked at her in amazement. "What's wrong with you, woman? Why are you crying bitterly?" they asked in unison. Emily could not stand it and told them the whole story. "Did you get trapped where you wanted to go?" They told her that Oliver and his young wife ran a swindling business, finding old ladies and swindling them. They're known all over the neighborhood, so they prey on strangers. Back home, the woman called her son into the kitchen. "Where's your vodka?" "Give Mother a shot," she asked. Jonathan went out and soon returned with a bottle. He filled the glasses. "To life," Emily said. "It's a bitter life." "There's no need to complain about life," Jonathan said conciliatingly. "We are what we are, and so is life. The law of the boomerang has never been repealed." Emily nodded. Empty, she got up from the table, walked to her bedroom, and collapsed tiredly on the bed. Melissa's image suddenly appeared in her dreams. "What did you want, Emily? What measure is right for you," she said. "You left a sick woman to fend for herself. You didn't want to take responsibility for her. And you turned your son against her. And now suddenly you want a woman's happiness. Where would it come from? All your life you've been sowing anger, envy, and discontent around you. That's why everything good is repelled from you. And life turned into a crumpled, dirty, useless leaf." Emily became so bad and ashamed that she did not want to wake up at all. After this incident, the woman became seriously ill and was hospitalized. No treatment regimen worked. Her blood pressure was at an all-time high. "Emily, you're lying here for nothing." A gypsy woman, a neighbor in the ward, suddenly spoke to her. "You have to get discharged immediately, or they'll heal you. Go home and review everything. And if you find anything foreign, burn it immediately. I can see that you're under a spell." Tired of treatment, and even more than from illnesses, the woman suddenly believed the stranger and left the hospital. When she returned home, she found a bundle of black inhuman hair under the sofa cushions. Fear gripped the woman. She realized that Oliver and his wife were also practicing magic and wanted to kill her. So when he slept on the couch, he'd put the magic thing there. Then when he found out it was Jonathan's apartment, he ran away. It was so scary that even after they realized that they couldn't take anything from Emily, the couple never removed the spoil. The woman squeamishly took the find, threw it in the sink, and wanted to set it on fire. Her hands were shaking with anger and indignation. The matches broke and wouldn't light. At last the flame burst out, and then the woman could not stand it and wept bitterly. And Melissa in the village was really enjoying her well-deserved happiness. She had gotten a divorce, and the young people were preparing to get married. What was their surprise when the former mother-in-law showed up on their doorstep in the early August morning? Melissa didn't even recognize her at first. "Hello, Melissa," Emily said in a squeaky voice. "Don't look at me like that. I know I'm sorry for what I did to you. Just don't send me away, Jonathan. When you came to our house and waited for the bus, we told him Abigail the witch doctor was involved in your healing. You know, I know it too." Melissa didn't hold back. "I realize you've never forgiven me, but I need you to take me to her. I've been cursed by dark people. I'm terribly ill. Have pity on me and help me to sin." "Okay, I will," Jonathan agreed. The young woman looked questioningly at Rick, who was standing next to her. He nodded silently. Melissa and Emily walked through the village to the witch doctor's house. They had nothing to talk about. Abigail, wearing a colorful white shawl, sat on a bench in front of her house. She began to speak without greeting. "You, woman, can be helped. Only you have a great sin on your hands, and the spoil holds on to it." "I know all my sins." Emily stopped and fell to her knees in front of Melissa. "I'm sorry I've done you a lot of harm. I confess I hated you fiercely. God humbled my pride. I sincerely apologize." "God will forgive. Stand up." Melissa gave her a hand. She stood up, shook herself, and looked at Abigail pleadingly. "Go," she commanded. "You won't get sick again, but you won't live happily ever after. Go to church, pray, repent. Don't come here again. It's a clean place and good people live here, even though it's in the middle of nowhere. We don't need your city vicissitudes for nothing. We have a forest near the river. The sky is big, blue, clear, and our life is clear. So go back with yours and try to live by God's laws. Then you won't shout, 'Why do I have these troubles?'" "Thank you," thanked Emily and headed for the bus stop. She wasn't sick anymore, and she wasn't seeing Melissa anymore. Rick loved the falling leaves and big winter snows in the quiet village, the wonderful forest on the outskirts of the village, and the calm river waters. Less and less often he had dreams from his past life. His soul was now a little calmer under the influence of local morality. The first ice crunched under his feet. Melissa was walking towards him in a delicate cream-colored dress with a bouquet of white roses in her hands. A fairy girl, Jonathan thought lovingly. The dark side of life gave way to the divine light he saw in the eyes of the woman he loved. The earthly path had thrown him different roles, but the best fate had prepared him to be a loving husband and future father. Happy Mom was by his side today. She cried when he introduced her to Melissa. The wise woman immediately discerned in the bride impeccable purity, devotion, ability to sacrifice. A simple country girl with no education, but courageous and unbroken. She looked at her son in such a way that it made my throat constrict. There was so much enthusiasm and love in her eyes. Today is the wedding day, and the loved ones are around. On their faces, sincere joy. Here it is a warm family atmosphere, mutual understanding and respect, advice and love. Jennifer and David had known each other since high school. They'd sat at the same desk for 5 years, sharing cribs and canteen buns. After school, they walked home together to the first intersection. Their families were friends, their parents worked together, and often went to visit each other, taking their children with them. David had been making fun of Jennifer's haircut for 2 years, calling her a kid. Jennifer couldn't stand his jokes, the dirt under his fingernails, and the stupid look on his face. Despite their frequent quarrels, her parents had said since childhood that they looked good together. They predicted a wedding. And so it was. It all started with a waltz. At graduation in the school hall, their class was divided into pairs in early May and obliged to go to rehearsals after school. David refused to dance with his partner because he was afraid of dropping her or stepping on her foot. Jennifer was also very shy about dancing. David suggested that the line partner switch. For 2 weeks they twirled properly as a couple. On the 3rd week they began to feel strangely embarrassed, looking into each other's eyes and holding hands. On the 4th, David couldn't take it anymore. On the way home, he tugged Jennifer by the edge of her apron and blurted out, "Jennifer, I love you." "I think, do you?" "And I think I do," she mumbled, feeling her cheeks flaming. After graduation, they enrolled in the same university. For a whole month, they enjoyed their freedom and each other. They walked until dawn, took the electric train to the bay to swim and roast bread by the fire. Their parents did not interfere with their meetings and the development of romantic relationships. Jennifer received a proposal of marriage from David a year later and agreed without hesitation, with the only condition: first you need to get an education. Both found paid internships in large construction firms. On vacation after the session, often went on independent travel in Europe, America, and Asia. They graduated from university together, she with a blue diploma and David with a red one. After university, they worked as engineers by specialty. The wedding was played modestly, as the newlyweds wished after the signing of the champagne and launching doves from the threshold of the registry office. Most of the guests were led home after the banquet. Only the closest relatives and a couple of best friends came to David's parents' house. Jennifer often looked at the photograph taken on her and David's wedding day. It hung on the wall in their living room. The two of them, young and happy. David in a simple shirt, she in a light summer dress with open shoulders. Nearby hung pictures of their children. Jennifer had never dreamed of children. Her dreams for the future were limited to a successful career and a job with a vocation. From a young age, she had been striving to figure out what that calling was. After graduation, she changed several jobs and specialties. Nothing could interest her for a long time. But Jennifer wasn't about to give up. On her 30th birthday, she planned to change her life once again abruptly to quit the company where she worked for 2 years. Fate decided otherwise and gave Jennifer a sudden pregnancy. A double. David didn't interfere with her decision to keep the children. He knew that his wife would not listen to him and would do everything in her own way. Jennifer, after consulting with her mother and David's parents, decided to give birth. "I'm going to try a new role," she announced at a family meeting. "What if I like it? Maybe I'm meant to be a mother." The pregnancy was easy. Jennifer spent the entire 9 months meeting with friends, attending trade shows and a school for new parents. Together with David, the two of them set up a children's corner in the living room, bought a crib and a small dresser, baby clothes, diapers and toys. After the birth, the family got back together at David and their parents' house. David's father sat in a rocking chair, holding his granddaughter in each hand, Claire in his left, the jar in his right. And Madison's newfound grandmothers were setting the table. Jennifer's father, along with David, arranged chairs around the table. Jennifer herself was half reclining on the couch, trying to get into a position where her postpartum stitch wouldn't hurt. She looked at the peaceful bustle around her and was convinced of the rightness of her decision to become a mom. She loved this new chapter of their life and life together. The first year of motherhood flew by. Before Jennifer knew it, when she took the traditional photos of the twins on their birthday, she was wondering how these well-fed children had fit on her lap a year ago. In the constant care of children, and order in the house, changing diapers, cooking, cleaning, laundry, playing with the girls, evening baths, walks. The routine seemed to eat up all the time and attention. But Jennifer didn't complain. She liked to take her time doing housework, taking care of the children and putting the house in order. David took full charge of the family, and after work he would go to the market and the supermarket to buy groceries and everything he needed. Jennifer did not go shopping because of the queues and the incredible heaviness of the twins and the stroller. The second year went just as smoothly. Parents began to visit often, which allowed the young couple to get away to a restaurant or meet with friends. Jennifer and David were grateful for their parents' support and privacy. When Claire and Madison turned 3, the question of daycare came up. Jennifer was adamantly opposed to putting her children in the care of strangers. She and David sat in the kitchen after putting the girls to bed and argued heatedly. What do they feed them? How are they looked after? The other day your mom told me how a kid got hit by a car outside the kindergarten. He'd gone out of the yard and into the road while walking. There's no safety, Jennifer said. David shook his head silently. Won't you go crazy sitting at home? Are you having some kind of problem at work? He asked. Why would you think that? Are you so desperate for me to go to work? Admit it. Are we beggars? David laughed. No, of course that's not the point. What is it about? Jennifer asked. Are you jealous of my carefree life as a housewife? And you want equality justice? No, I'm just worried about you, David replied. Jennifer advanced on the stool toward her husband. And what is the reason for your worries? Aren't you bored? 3 years at home. It used to be that neither salary nor career success could keep you in one place for long. What about a vocation? Jennifer asked. I think I found it. Yeah, she raised her voice indignantly. Don't make that face. It's the truth. I really like being a mom. I don't like being a housewife as much. If we're not poor, maybe we can hire some Elizabeth to come once a week to do the general cleaning. David set the empty coffee cup carefully on the table. Well, if you like it, fine. Go ahead. Only I have to tell you something ... that he divorced me. Jennifer laughed. I won't be home from work later. It's now somewhere around 2. Jennifer raised an eyebrow. You got a mistress? More like a part-time job to pay Elizabeth. What kind of part-time job? I can't say. It wasn't exactly legal. Nothing criminal, David replied. Don't sigh. That's scary. Secret semi-legal business, Jennifer said. She stroked his head, reached up and kissed his temple. There's no way around it? No. You trust me? Where would I go? David asked. Is that why you wanted to put the girls in daycare? Were you afraid I'd get violent because you'd help me less? Or were you afraid I'd be jealous? All of them. But you're okay with it. I'll start tomorrow. Don't wait up for me. Go to bed, David said. I hope you're not going to do your business on the weekend? No, he looked at his hand, at his watch. Let's go to bed. We have to get up soon. From then on, David started coming home from work later. He made regular stops at the stores, quietly brought the bags into the kitchen, showered and got under the covers, trying not to wake the kids and Jennifer. No matter how hard Jennifer tried to find out the details of his part-time job, David wouldn't reveal them. All he said was that he was basically doing odd jobs and finishing one man's work for another. David has more experience in this sort of thing than this man. And of course he's not cheating on Jennifer. David promises to tell Jennifer everything when the hack job is over, in about a year. He didn't tell his parents anything either, not even his father, with whom he shared absolutely all his problems and successes. He reacted to his son's silence calmly. "I guess that's the way it has to be," he told David and Jennifer. "I trust him. And do you trust him? He'll tell me when he sees fit." Jennifer's parents weren't happy with that arrangement, especially Mom. "Customer," she whispered, aggressively shutting the door to the room. "Are you out of your mind? David told you in no uncertain terms that he didn't like you anymore? That you're offended? That he's got a mistress? Or that he's going clubbing?" "Do I look that bad, Mom?" Jennifer smiled. "It's not about looks. Your looks are great, your figure, your hair, your face. But that's not why men love women. Why?" "For a sassy look and a crooked walk," Mom said. "Why are you laughing? You know I'm right. Where is it? Where, I ask you? You're a good mom, but there's not much woman left in you. Your David sees you as a mom. Lenka, caring, kind, but he didn't marry his mother. He married a young, attractive girl. Mom, I've known David since 6th grade. He's seen things you haven't seen. Remember when I fell in the manure in the country? He pulled me out of it and cleaned me up and helped me wash my clothes. Not you. So what? So what? He loved me. He married me. That's why he loved me. That's why I married him," Jennifer said. Her mother waved her hand. "Do as you please. If he cheats on you, don't come complaining to me." Life went on as usual. Jennifer got used to the new routine and missed her husband. She tried to get up early on weekdays to spend time with her husband at breakfast. She seriously considered going to work. She reasoned, yes, with a job, less time will be spent with the girls, but my husband will have less work, and they will be able to spend time together more often, the 4 of them. Jennifer did not share her thoughts with David. He was still as caring, calm and cheerful as before. His part-time job didn't bore him, but it didn't bring him much joy either. On Fridays, Elizabeth, the aunt Jennifer had dreamed of hiring, came to visit. Jennifer had found her through a cleaning agency. Elizabeth would scrub the tiles in the bathroom, kitchen, scrub the floors and windows, vacuum, clean stains from clothes, walls and furniture. After her cleaning, the apartment stayed clean until almost the next time she came back. In the meantime, Jennifer was out with Claire and Patricia. They went to the lake to feed the ducks, rode on the swings in the yard, and petted the neighbors' dogs. One day during their walk, Jennifer was approached by a neighbor, Madison. "How are you two doing?" she asked. "Growing up?" Madison gave Jennifer a little hug and a pat on the back. "How are you doing? You're not sick, are you?" "No, thanks. Healthy as an ox," Jennifer said. Madison wanted to say something else, but she didn't. She stood there for a moment, her fist to her mouth. "Listen, Christopher," she began. "How are things with you and David? In what way? Not fighting?" "No, why do you ask?" "No reason," Madison said. "Let's go to the bench and sit down. My legs are killing me. I went for a walk at 1 in the morning last night. My blood pressure spiked, and I needed some air. Be careful." "Yeah, I'm careful. Yeah, I'm careful," Jennifer said. They cleared the bench seats of fallen leaves and sat down where they could see Patricia and Claire playing in the sandbox with the other children. So Madison continued, "I went out for some air, and I saw David coming, and I recognized his car. I thought it was late. He's on his way home." "Yeah, he's working late now. He's got some kind of part-time job," Jennifer said. "A part-time job?" "Well, I guess so," Madison nodded. "And I think he said hello to the neighbor, and he stopped and got out of the car, and I was standing there, under the lilac tree over there. The light of the street lamp wasn't falling. You couldn't see me. Before I could say hello, David's cell phone rang. I wouldn't want to distract the man. He answered it. I figured someone had asked him to buy groceries. He repeated the list. Milk, eggs. I don't remember everything." "I didn't ask," Jennifer said thoughtfully. "Maybe his parents called. Do they often take him shopping at 1 in the morning?" Madison wondered. Jennifer listened to Madison carefully. Yeah, that's weird, she said. That's what I thought. That's why I thought I'd tell you. I'm not a gossip, I don't want to say anything. It just surprised me. A man comes home from work and someone calls him and asks him to buy milk. Where would he buy it? I don't know, Jennifer said. I'll talk to him today and find out, and I'll tell you. Don't. Madison became agitated. Why do I need your life? It's none of my business. But you get the point. After midnight, as usual, Jennifer waited for her husband in the kitchen. David came in quietly, closed the door, changed his clothes, and came up to her to kiss her. Hello, he said. What are you doing up again? I told you not to wait for me. I can pour my own tea. Jennifer whispered in his ear, hugging him. Curiosity is keeping me awake. Madison told me how you were on the phone last night asking for groceries. I asked my parents, and neither of them called you last night. David unclenched Jenny Farina's hands behind his back and pulled away. And what do you want to know? Who called me? Yeah, you promised you wouldn't be jealous of me. So why am I jealous? I'm not jealous, Jennifer said, slumping down on the stool. I want to know who you buy groceries for at night. No one. I came home last night after that conversation, and I bought groceries in the evening, as usual. Who's the groceries for? Jennifer asked. David leaned on the windowsill, sighed heavily, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Jennifer, I'm really tired. Let's not get jealous right now. I can't tell you who I bought groceries for. Is that your part-time job, buying groceries? Jennifer asked, jumping up from her seat and pacing the kitchen from corner to corner, arms crossed. I thought you were in the office doing reports and estimates, but you're buying milk for someone. David watched her movements in silence for a while. Then he came over and took her by the shoulders. For a woman, he said. I don't have another. If that interests you, believe it or not. In the morning, Jennifer caught Madison in the driveway and told her that her husband was buying groceries for his parents. The neighbor exhaled in relief and sincerity. Jennifer didn't talk about her personal life anymore and decided not to tell her mother about her husband buying groceries for someone else. She knew nothing good would come of it. If her mother knew, she would worry, speculate, and question her son-in-law's fidelity. Jennifer decided to devote all her time to New Year's Eve preparations. In the first year of Patricia and Claire's life, they did not have a proper celebration. Because the twins were sick, they didn't go to Jennifer's parents' house. They stayed in their apartment to watch dull TV, give the children medication on schedule, take their temperature, and eat Olivier salad bought at the nearest store. We didn't even have a Christmas tree, because we planned to decorate it in the country. So we bought a huge fluffy beauty at the sawmill, one for everyone, David and Jennifer and their parents. On January 1st, David's parents arrived. They brought some food from the New Year's table. They talked and babysat their granddaughters. On January 2nd, Jennifer's parents arrived and did the same thing. They showed pictures from the cottage, the Christmas tree, the huge garland in the yard, meat on the fire, homemade Napoleon. And on the third day, the girls recovered, which was confirmed by David's friend, part-time pediatrician. This year, Jennifer planned a double celebration. She bought her parents a Christmas tree with a wreath of pine needles and garlands. Patricia and Claire looked with interest at the decorations in paper bags waiting in the hallway. They didn't know yet that they would be spending a few days with their grandparents while their parents' sunbathed on the beach. Tickets to Egypt was the gift Jennifer had prepared for David. She got the tickets by chance and by sheer luck. She saw in one of the social networks the drawing of tickets when she was looking at photos of acquaintances with David. She decided to participate and won. It was her first experience of participating in such events and the first victory. Jennifer hadn't said anything to David yet. She wanted to surprise him. She packed the tickets in a beautiful envelope, waiting for the chimes to strike. They were to fly out on January 2nd and stay in Egypt for 3 days, returning before the end of the New Year holidays. Jennifer had warned her and her husband's parents. They happily agreed to look after the children, and with enviable responsibility kept silent, so as not to spoil the surprise. They decided to celebrate New Year's Eve at the cottage. The dacha belonged to Jennifer's parents. They had built it in the Soviet years on a plot of land that they had managed to snatch at a cheap price during the auction. They installed gas and electricity themselves, dug a well. Then came a good house with a log attic, a bathhouse and fruit trees. Jennifer's mother planted new flowers every year, beautifying the plot. She grew vegetables, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers in the greenhouse, onions, carrots, and herbs in the beds. Jennifer loved the cottage, and so did David. They both had many memories of childhood, youth, and their honeymoon, most of which they had spent here. The wood paneling of the attic was scrawled with a penknife, David, Jennifer, David, Jennifer, David is a fool, Jennifer is a chicken. Before becoming a couple, David and Jennifer had lived here as friends all summer during school vacations, running to swim at the lake and climbing the apple trees in the orchard. Now the cottage attracted them with its privacy, the familiar smells of the cozy living room, and the woods nearby. It was hard to imagine a better place to celebrate New Year's Eve. David worked until December 30th, so on December 30th they poured hot tea into a thermos, took sandwiches with them, put Patricia and Claire in the back seat, and prepared for a 3-hour journey through traffic and uncleared roads to the accompaniment of children's crying. As soon as they arrived, the children were picked up by their parents and sent David and Jennifer off to bathe in the bathhouse, have lunch and rest after the road. The elders arrived a week early to avoid traffic and clean the house before the guests arrived. On December 31st, the women made salads and the men roasted meat outside. The twins were entrusted to Jennifer. They put them in an old sled, put a blanket underneath, and sent them out for a walk in the winter woods. Jennifer, dressed in her husband's jacket, her father's boots, and her mother-in-law's scarf, pulled the sled by the rope, her head cocked back and gazing at the snow-covered tops of the centuries-old spruce trees. The forest hummed as the wind picked up, piles of snow falling from the branches. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped on a trunk. Patricia and Claire slept with their noses red from the frost. Suddenly, the silence of the forest was interrupted by a ringing sound. It was David's cell phone in Jennifer's jacket pocket. She cursed, glancing at the sleepwalking babies. Quickly, she fumbled for the phone and took the call. A certain rental was calling. "Yes," Jennifer said. "Hello? Can you hear me?" There was silence on the other end. "You probably can't hear me," Jennifer concluded. "We're in the woods, and the connection's bad. I'll tell David you called. He'll call you." After listening to the silence for a while, she ended the call. Before putting the phone back in her pocket, she looked at the time. They had been walking for an hour. They needed to get back. When she entered the wicket, carefully holding the sled, David and her father were grilling the last pieces of meat. "Jennifer, did they call you back?" David asked. "Some kind of rental," Jennifer replied. She went into the house, changed her clothes, and put the kids to bed. Now they wouldn't wake up until morning. Elizabeth stayed in the room with Patricia and Claire, sent Jennifer off to get dressed and put on her makeup. Jennifer had brought a long-sleeve silk dress and red lipstick. Her short hair didn't require styling, and she wasn't a big fan of makeup, believing she looked good without it. Her opinion was justified. In her 33 years, she looked the same as she did 10 years ago. Not a single wrinkle appeared on Jennifer's face. During this time, there had been a change with her husband, David. Over the past 10 years, he has turned from a shy and modest guy into a confident man who goes to the gym and watches his diet, wears a status watch, dresses solidly, and looks representative. Next to Jennifer, her husband looked older, and she liked it very much. She liked to feel protected, to feel her husband's trust and her power. She put on her dress and warm socks, twirled around in the mirror, and went downstairs. At the Christmas tree, she saw David, looking like a magazine cover model, in slacks and a dark green sweater with braids. Elizabeth was also stacking presents under the tree. "I'm ready," Jennifer said as she approached her husband. "Jennifer, beautiful," Elizabeth exclaimed theatrically, clutching her heart. "You're so beautiful." "Beautiful," David smiled, putting his arm around her waist. "And we want to put all the presents under the tree and sign them, just like in the good old days. We'll open them after the chimes strike." Jennifer leaned over and put the signed envelope under the tree. Jennifer's mom's voice came from the kitchen. She was calling for her daughter to help her. Jennifer put on an apron, moved a few dishes to the living room table, arranged the slices nicely on plates, and laid out the utensils. It was 3 hours until New Year's Eve. Everyone sat down at the table. The meat, prepared in advance, was heated in the oven. It filled the room with the tart smell of smoke. However, the smell of spruce branches interrupted it. They began to remember the past year, the girl's funny words, the mishap with the purchase of the car, the cat's disappearance and its return, the unsuccessful experiments with Jennifer's father's appearance. Appetizers were rapidly disappearing from the table. Faces grew ruddy, eyes buttery. From the wine Jennifer's mom was drinking, she would leave the kitchen every now and then, only to return with another batch of mashed potatoes or meat. Everyone got up with glasses of champagne and shouts of yay and cheerful clinking of glasses to welcome the new year. Elizabeth went up to the second floor and checked on the girls. They were still asleep, having thrown off the blanket, and were cuddled across the double bed. When Jennifer returned to the family, everyone had moved to the couch, covered in plaid. Elizabeth alone went from the Christmas tree to the couch, giving the recipients gifts: David from Mom, Dad from David, Jennifer from Jennifer. She voiced the signed labels. David from Jennifer. Hang in there, David. He picked up the envelope, showed it to Jennifer, making sure it wasn't divorce papers. I hope so, Jennifer laughed. Worse. David opened the envelope, pulling out the vouchers. Surprise. Jennifer kissed him on the cheek. You and I are going to Egypt for 3 days. Mom and Dad will watch the girls. I've arranged it. Can't you say no? You don't have to go to work. Jennifer won them a month ago. Elizabeth entered. Was it hard not to blab? Say it was hard, the others agreed. David remained silent and twirled the tickets in his hands, frowning. The smile was gone from his face. You don't like it? Jennifer asked. Come on, let's go talk. They went out onto the porch, putting on their parents' felt boots and throwing on their jackets. The tickets were left lying lonely on the couch. David and Jennifer's parents looked at them anxiously, trying to diffuse the situation and make conversation. Jennifer, I can't fly, I have work, David said, his gaze hard. That's very nice of you. I appreciate your efforts. I suggest you go on your own, get away, get some rest. What kind of work? You said you weren't going to the office until the 8th. I'm not going to the office. I need a part-time job. Jennifer bit her lip, trying to hold back her tears. But it wasn't working. She sobbed. What kind of part-time job is it that you can't give up for 3 days? Couldn't you and I go on vacation together? Cheryl interrupted. The last time we went was 4 years ago, before I got pregnant. Don't you want to spend time together without kids and parents like we used to? David wiped her tears with the back of his palm, put on his hoodie, and buttoned up his down jacket. I want to know what kind of part-time work you're doing now, she demanded. Her husband smiled guiltily and shrugged, signaling that he wasn't about to reveal his secrets. Jennifer turned and walked into the house, slamming the door. Her parents, sitting in the room, flinched in surprise, but she didn't listen to their questions or sympathy. Jennifer took off her felt boots and down jacket and went up to the second floor to the room where her daughters slept. Locking herself in, she threw the tickets on the floor beside the bed. Resting her forehead on her knee, she cried silently, clutching the hair on her temples until it hurt. And when she ran out of tears, she curled up on the floor and fell asleep. In the morning, she was awakened by a barely audible knock on the door. It was David. He had brought breakfast and a warm robe. She didn't speak to him. She woke the girls, combed their hair, dressed them, washed them, and braided their pigtails. I didn't do ponytails, said one of the daughters. David took the children in his arms and carried them to breakfast. The parents were still asleep. Jennifer made the girls porridge, left them to David, and got dressed and went out for a walk. Dawn was breaking in the east. The snow crunched loudly beneath her feet, and frost clung to her eyelashes. This wasn't the kind of holiday Jennifer had envisioned when she'd bought garlands and gift paper. At least my face isn't swollen from the cold, she reassured herself, waving her arms and quickening her steps in an attempt to warm up. Hot broth and sleepy parents were waiting for her at home. The drinks from last night had taken their toll on their vigor and well-being. Lunch passed in silence. After lunch, Jennifer's mother stayed with her in the kitchen washing dishes while the others went sledding. After making sure everyone was gone and the front door was closed, she pounced on her daughter with questions. So what happened yesterday? David didn't like your present? Jennifer nodded grimly. Why? Jennifer's mother asked. I don't know. I mean, how did he not explain it to you? He did. He has a part-time job on the holidays, Jennifer said. Can't you say no? Can't. What kind of part-time job is that? Jennifer's mother threw a plate in the sink. Ask him. Maybe he'll tell you, she said disapprovingly. I knew it. I told you, Jennifer, he'd find a mistress. And here it is. Jennifer didn't listen any further. Her mother tore off her apron and ran into the room. Jennifer heard the children and her father-in-law return from their walk, her husband's cheerful voice telling her something. But she couldn't find the strength to open the door and go down to her family. It seemed as if her life was crumbling before her eyes, and she was powerless to do anything about it. After an hour, she got up, packed her and the girls' things into a suitcase, and called a cab. She hastily said goodbye to her parents, dressed the crying children who didn't want to go anywhere. And before slamming the door behind her, she turned to her husband. If you want to tell me about your part-time job, please come home. Until then, don't show up, Jennifer snarled, nodded to her parents, and closed the door. For 2 days, the three of them lived with Claire and Patricia. Her mother called. David's father called. David himself called. Reassured Jennifer that it was foolish to overreact, to take offense at nothing. Guaranteed her husband's repentance in their summer vacation together. Hinted that spouses are supposed to have some secrets from each other. That the desire to thoroughly know everything about her husband's life is more like a pathology in infantile Jennifer, rather than a fair demand. After those long phone conversations, she was nervous and anxious for a long time, despite her outward calmness, preparing breakfast or lunch for her daughters, participating in their games. But she herself was far away, and everything inside Jennifer cried. She hated her husband for betraying her and was angry at her relatives because they supported him and not her. She hated herself, accepting for a while the presence of her infantilization. Couldn't find someone to blame, and went in circles in her reasoning. The longer Jennifer thought about what had happened, the less she realized anything. Eventually, Jennifer grew tired of the uncertainty. She called her husband, and without answering his greetings, blurted out, "If I find out you have someone on the side, you won't see the girls again. Agreed?" Silence. The second thing, Jennifer continued, "I'm going out to work. I want to make some money so I feel safe. And 3, since you're not saying anything." "I'm going home," her husband David interrupted. "I'm bringing your presents. My parents gave them to me. I'll be there in 2 hours." He came home as Jennifer was putting Patricia and Claire down for their afternoon nap. He opened the door with his own key, set the bag of his wife's gifts on the kitchen table, put the goodies in the refrigerator. Through the open bedroom door, he stood looking at Jennifer and the children for a while. She was reading a book to them, stroking Claire's head, and Patricia was already snoozing next to her. When Claire fell asleep, Jennifer closed the book, climbed out of bed and left the room, closing the door. David was sitting on the couch in the living room. "Come here," he said, patting the couch next to him. "Let's have a talk. Or are you still holding a grudge?" "I resent it," Jennifer replied and sat down on the couch. Her husband's hand rested on her shoulder. She saw the ring on his ring finger and felt tears come to her throat. David pulled her to him, buried his face in her hair. "Jennifer, I'm sorry," he said. "That's what you wanted to hear. I'm an idiot. An asshole. The world's worst husband and father, a freak and a bastard, a scoundrel. But I'm not cheating on you. I'm sorry about that too. When are you going to tell me about your part-time job?" "Soon." "Soon. I already told my parents." "Yeah?" Jennifer rounded her eyes and jumped off the couch. "Humor told me no." "Yeah, your mom said not to tell you. You wouldn't understand." Why wouldn't I understand, I wondered. Jennifer stared expectantly. David didn't say anything. "If I asked you to give up this part-time job, who would you choose? Her or me and the girls? Then pick us." "Jennifer, I'm choosing you now." Jennifer sat on the edge of the couch. "No more coming home late, always on time, yes?" "Yes," David nodded. I'll just post something tomorrow. And no more part-time jobs, David continued. But you still won't tell me where you're going tomorrow and why. I will, he nodded. June. Jennifer thought for a moment, then nodded and smiled victoriously. She had dinner to make and laundry to do. David ironed shirts and a suit. After dinner and an evening walk, they went to bed in the same bed as before, as if nothing had happened. For the first time in a long time, Jennifer felt at peace. Her mind was quiet and empty. In the morning, after seeing her husband off, she was standing at the stove when the phone rang. Looking at the screen, Jennifer was surprised and delighted at the same time. The caller was an old friend with whom she had once been in the same class. "Hello, Tara," she answered. "It's been so long since we've talked to you." "Hello, Jennifer." Tara's voice hadn't changed a bit from the last time they'd seen each other the year before. "I missed you, so I thought I'd give you a call." "Yeah, I missed you too, but I've been busy with one thing or another. I've been texting you on social media. Did you see it?" Jennifer put the lid on the soup and relaxed on the couch. The conversation was long and happy. We discussed plans for the New Year's holidays, the health and success of the children, their ailments. They agreed to meet over the weekend to introduce the children and have some fun. Tara was almost a year younger than Jennifer. Too petite for her age, she was constantly attacked by her classmates. Things were taken away from her, food was taken from her in the cafeteria, and she was tripped up. Jennifer always defended her friend and fiercely fought back against her abusers. When David came to their class, the three of them became friends. Tara sat in the front alone, turning to David and Jennifer at recess to chat. She'd walk out of school with them, walk them to the gate, then walk in the opposite direction, confident that no snowball would fly at her head while her friends were walking behind her. David and Jennifer's affair, Tara took it calmly, even rejoiced. By this time, she also had a beau, Alex, from 9th grade. The guy was a year younger than Tara, but no one noticed the difference. Next to Tara, even some 5th graders looked more mature and manly. After graduation, Tara and Jennifer's paths diverged somewhat. They began to see each other less often, but often corresponded on social networks. Tara didn't go to university, choosing to work instead of studying. She went into business, making custom gingerbread and cakes because she had always loved to bake. Jennifer was happy about her friend's success and did not judge her choice. At Tara's wedding to Alex 3 years after graduation, Jennifer was a witness on the groom's side. She liked Alex tall, confident, and determined. He was the oldest child in the family and had been used to being an adult since he was a kid. Already after school, he had started reselling and buying cars, and then turned it into a business. It seemed to Jennifer that Alex had all the qualities that David lacked. Looking at her husband's perfect handwriting as he finalized his next project, she sincerely wished he were less obedient and less correct. David didn't share Jennifer's enthusiasm for Alex. He considered him a hustler and discouraged Tharooks from marrying him. However, David's predictions about the imminent divorce did not come true. Chetta lived soul to soul for more than 10 years. They recently celebrated the 8th birthday of their son Ethan. Jennifer and David were his godparents. Ethan was in 2nd grade and was eager to show off his yearly grades to his kind Aunt Jennifer, as he called her, hoping to receive praise and a gift for his progress. Before Claire and Leo were born, Jennifer had spent a lot of time with her friend and her young son, often dropping by after work with something delicious. Playing with Ethan, giving Tara time to rest and finish things. When Jennifer became a mom herself, she had no time for her friend and her son. All of it was taken up with taking care of her own daughters. During her pregnancy, she and Tara often met for a cup of tea. Tara shared with her her experience of motherhood, gave her advice and answered her questions. They saw each other at Jennifer's discharge from the hospital, and then their communication gradually decreased. Jennifer did not see it as anything terrible or unexpected, considered it a natural process. At Tara, Alex, and Ethan's birthday party, she always called her friend to congratulate her or one of the family members. Tara did the same. Every year, Jennifer was pleased to note that their friendship was as sincere and honest as it had been in high school. One thing that frustrated her was David's attitude toward her friend's husband at all their meetings and get-togethers. This attitude depressed the atmosphere, creating an invisible but palpable tension between the men. No one seemed to notice him except Jennifer. She tried to ask David the reason for his dislike. Why do you treat Alex like he's stealing your car and reselling it? Jennifer asked, sitting in front of the dressing table after a shower. David was reading something while lying in bed. He didn't answer right away. Do you believe you can make an honest living buying cars at 18? I believe that with a bit of entrepreneurial spirit you can. We have different ideas about enterprising people, that's all. Jennifer sighed, climbed under the covers, looked at her husband, who was still reading. Do you think I'm enterprising? You gave birth to twins? He laughed. You bet I did. And no kidding, I've always liked your determination. You changed jobs so easily. I couldn't have done it. Would you like to? David thought about it. No, I guess I'm not as good as you. You're not. It pays well. And you're happy? I bet you are. Jennifer often returned to the thought of why she often felt sorry for her husband and thought of him as an unhappy man mired in envy. It was envy that she attributed to her dislike of Alex. In the end, Alex's independence and freedom from office regulations seemed to her to be reason enough for the family to think of him as a hustler. The Alexes lived quite modestly, a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts, 1 car, which Alex was always taking to the service station to keep it running. Alex had never been in trouble with the law. He did not offend Tara and his son. On the contrary, he always tried to please them. He gave flowers and appliances to his wife, gifts to Ethan. When Jennifer told David that a friend had called and they agreed to meet on the weekend, he was not very happy. Do I have to go? It's Tara. David exclaimed. What are you doing? I haven't seen her in what, 2 years or 3? 3, Jennifer replied. Don't you want to meet her? She changed her color to red. And Ethan's in 2nd grade, can you imagine? I can imagine. Alex will probably be there too. It's a weekend, he's home on weekends. We wanted to meet up. Tara's baking a cake for them. I don't want to go out with him, David said. Why I don't like him? You know why. In the evening, Jennifer called a friend, said that her husband categorically did not want to see Tara's husband. She apologized. Tara, surprisingly, was not upset, even pleased. It turned out that Alex was also not eager to meet David in his own house, and explicitly asked his wife to rid him of such a guest. I thought they'd wise up as they got older, Tara concluded. But I guess it's true that men's childhood at 40 is just beginning. Saturday morning, Jennifer made breakfast. While Patricia and Claire watched a cartoon, David, returning from a run, showered and helped her set the table. Then they had breakfast of oatmeal with cream and sandwiches. Leaving the kids to her husband, Jennifer dressed quickly, put a change of clothes and snacks for the girls, gifts for Tara and Ethan, and a phone charger in her bag. Dressed the kids. David offered them a ride, and Jennifer accepted. There was silence along the way. After waving goodbye to Patricia and Claire, David drove off. Alex, along with Tara, went out to greet the guests. After a welcoming hug, the girls briskly walked up the porch steps, not letting the adults take them in their arms and carry them up the freight elevator. They reached the 7th floor. The Alex's apartment looked the same as it had 3 years ago when everyone had gathered for a celebratory dinner after Ethan's baptism, except that Ethan's room had been redecorated. The crib was replaced by an adult one, a desk and a shelf for textbooks. There were more toys, too. Patricia and Claire were immediately interested in them. The 3 of them and Ethan sat on the carpet and looked at the toy railroad. Sometimes they stopped the train with their hands and attached new cars to it. Tara baked Jennifer, Patricia, and Claire's favorite cake. The aroma of baked goods and honey wafted throughout the house. I wish David could have been here, Jennifer said. He loves honey so much. Tara glanced at her husband as she cut the cake into slices. David, Alex began, scrunching up his nose. We're all adults here. We all understand why David isn't here. There was an awkward pause. Jennifer waved her hand. I don't want to spoil the mood for myself and you. Tara, will you put a piece of this with me and I'll give it to him? I don't want to spoil anyone's mood either, Alex said. Unlike your husband. Alex, why? Tara objected. What's the point of these ceremonies? All of us, I think that David is a little complicated man, with a complicated character, harmful, in short, and too proud. Jennifer thought for a moment. He didn't say why he didn't like you. He said it was because I'm a scoundrel and a bad person, Alex answered. Or what was it? A rascal, he said. When he called you that, I don't remember, Tara said. At our wedding you weren't around. Did you go to the restroom? Alex laughed. He said, I don't approve of your choice, but I support you. You're not a bad guy, Alex. You're kind of smart, but your business is murky. What worries me is that you're a crook, Alex. You're a crook. Tara, don't ever forget that. What an attachment. Jennifer took a few sips of her tea. I don't understand. Maybe there's something we don't know with you. Did you nail someone or something? Or what? Tara placed a saucer with a piece of cake in front of her. Yes, Alex. Are you a criminal mastermind by any chance? I've never hurt anyone in my entire life. So far, Alex answered. Although the desire arises often. People often try to cheat when buying or selling cars. Thank you, sweetheart, Alex said, taking the saucer from Tara's hands. But I've never even once cheated anyone. Although there was such a desire, I admit. Sometimes I want to give people the same treatment they give me. Don't take offense to David, Jennifer interjected. Don't take offense to me. Okay, how can you be offended by your friends? Alex waved his hands. Then they gave the children tea with honey. We decided to go out and walk a little to the nearest park so that Claire and Patricia wouldn't get tired on the way. They were put in Ethan's sled. Eitan himself ran ahead, showing his neighborhood. And here is the school where I go to school. And here's the store. And here's the skating rink. He shouted. In his hands, Ethan held a soft toy, a gift from Jennifer Tier. She had given Tara and Alex a porcelain vase of flowers, and Alex a soft horsehide purse. Tara lamented for a long time that she was a bad friend and a terrible person because she had forgotten about the gifts for Jennifer and her children. On the way to the park, she tried to think of what to get. What about a cake, Jennifer? She finally asked as they entered the tall wrought iron gate. And gingerbread, Claire said. I want gingerbread, like on the Christmas tree. In the park, they had built an ice rink for New Year's Eve. The children ran through the maze under Eitan's guidance, laughing with laughter from the running and the frost. Their cheeks were scarlet, and their eyes glistened with happiness. Alex stood, hugging Thera from behind and watching the children, occasionally intervening in the women's dialogue. Jennifer thought for a long time whether to tell her friend about her husband's strange part-time job during the holidays and her parents' reaction to what had happened. In the end, she decided to share her worries. I still don't know if I did the right thing, Jennifer finished her story. I don't know what it was. It was idiotic. He never told you what the part-time job was? Yes, Alex said thoughtfully. No, David answered. He said he'd tell me later. He couldn't right now, supposedly. That's a strange story, said Tara. My parents aren't talking either, keeping a secret, like partisans. Jennifer sighed. I still can't communicate with them properly after all this. How do I treat them? As liars or as people who behave reasonably, unlike me? Tara released herself from her husband's embrace, walked over to Jennifer and took her hand. Jennifer, it seems to me that if he was supporting a second wife and children, the parents would have told you. It's not like they're immoral people. Jennifer smiled. And really, I doubt my mom would have let him live peacefully on this earth after learning of his betrayal or infidelity. He's probably taking care of his grandmother or grandfather, Tara continued. You know he always stands up for the weak. Remember how you two defended me at school before Alex showed up? Claire came running up, out of breath and tired. I'm hungry. We decided to warm up at a nearby cafe with a children's area. They ordered mashed potatoes with chicken cutlets for the kids and hot pumpkin soup with cheese toast for themselves. When the Eitan twins got off their plates, they were taken away by animators so the adults could have a chance to sit quietly. Tara talked about all their family trips to Peru, Argentina, Italy, Sardinia. Jennifer listened with mild envy. She, too, loved traveling, hiking through new towns, getting to know the locals. Her suitcase was decorated with souvenir labels and stickers from Brazil, Sweden, Norway, Belgium. David was not such an avid traveler. He often flew on business trips for work. He had a poor tolerance for flights, so he associated traveling exclusively with something obligatory and unpleasant. Whereas Jennifer's greatest pleasure in her youth was to change her place of residence, David valued stability and routine above all else. After Claire and Patricia were born, their family travels were limited to Florida resorts. They rented a house by the sea or in the mountains for 2 weeks with a pool and a small garden, with a hostess who cooked the meals, or at least a family restaurant nearby. It was a kind of compromise between the comforts of home, a familiar lifestyle, and traveling. David had the privacy to negotiate, go jogging, and get a good night's sleep. Jennifer had a break from domestic duties. In the evenings, we all explored the neighborhood together, hiking trails, riding horses and chairlifts, watching the sunset, buying fruit, getting to know and chatting with the locals. Jennifer enjoyed going on these family mini-vacations, but really missed her independence and former penchant for adventure. She chased the resentment away by reminiscing about what a wonderful husband and children she had, and how much she loved them. I remember when I quit my job, when I wanted to be a housewife and devote all my time to my family. When I asked David to take over the family, Jennifer said nostalgically, listening to her friends' stories, "I think when the girls grow up and go to school, I'll go to work and we'll travel like we used to. I want to show them the world and remind myself that there is a world beyond our neighborhood." Jennifer called for the waiter. "We should go home. My girls are about to fall asleep." Alex paid the bill. Everyone got dressed and stood around the porch waiting for David. He was supposed to pick up Jennifer and the kids. From far away, they saw a car approaching. Alex and Tara said goodbye to Jennifer. David pulled into the parking lot beside them, turned off the engine, and got out to put Claire and Patricia in. "Hi, Tara." He hugged his friend and extended his hand to Alex. "Hi, who's this guy? Grown up, serious. Is it Ethan?" "Hey man, how's it going?" He listened to Ethan's short story about boxing, shook his hand, praised his courage. After sitting the yawning children down, he helped Jennifer sit down and closed the door. He turned around in passing. "Will we get together sometime? Sit down again?" "Sure," Tara nodded. The car was warm from the heater on the way home. David turned to Jennifer. "How's Tara doing? What's new?" Jennifer briefly recounted the highlights of Alex's family life. She didn't discuss the odd part-time job, the blown trip, or her relationship with Alex. David nodded contentedly. "Tara looks good. Ethan's grown up. Alex is doing well at work," Jennifer said. "Why are you so interested in his progress all of a sudden?" David sneered. "He's not worthy of such attention, is he? Didn't my attitude toward him bother you before? What's changed?" Jennifer thought for a moment. "I used to make excuses for you, allow the idea that you were right about him to some extent. And now I make excuses for him because you seem like a big leaguer." David laughed. "Well, what have you descended to?" They never spoke again. They drove the rest of the way in silence. As she lay down to sleep on the bed beside her husband, Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling of squeamishness mixed with anxiety. David seemed like a stranger after meeting Tara and talking to Alex. She was uncomfortable being so close to him. She felt embarrassed and defenseless at the same time. She was overcome with a maddening sadness. She didn't want to ruin what she had spent years building, to feel her loved one drifting away and becoming a stranger. I wanted to cry. Instead, Jennifer pulled the blanket up higher, lying on her side, and bit her lip. New Year's vacation was over. Life was back to the same old, troubled routine. David went to work. Jennifer took care of the house. He would bring in the groceries on her list and be home by 8 o'clock at night. She would make him breakfast, walk him out, and greet him. While her husband was away, she would tutor the children. They read, molded, glued, cut, and played. They often went to playgrounds and generally tried to be around other children for longer periods of time. Jennifer wanted to prepare Claire and Patricia for kindergarten so that it wouldn't be a shock for them to be separated from their mom. While the girls slept in the afternoon after a walk and lunch, she researched private daycare centers on the internet, their locations, rates, and reviews. She found a couple of suitable ones and showed them to David. He approved of both but liked the one that was closer. The grandparents came on weekends, bringing jars of homemade pickles and jam and toys for the children. We didn't go to the dacha anymore. It was too far and exhausting to get to work. Neither of them brought up the subject of part-time work in their quarrel, and the spouses themselves did not discuss the events of the last few days even among themselves. Everything seemed to be back to normal, but Jennifer felt a strange sense of unreality. Her life seemed to her a movie or a circus performance, and people in it actors. She thought of herself as an actress, and a very good one at that. Every morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, she stared at her reflection for a long time. Her gaze was cold and hard, as if it had faded. The thought of Claire and Patricia seeing that look when they woke up in the morning made her want to drink. It's not the kids' fault, Jennifer decided. She put on her sweetest smile and the look of a loving mother before leaving the bathroom and going to wake the girls. Her parents and David noticed the change in Jennifer, asking, "What's wrong with you? Why are you so tired? Are you sick?" Jennifer waved it off. "I'm fine." It was a lie. She was sick. In March, Claire and Patricia started kindergarten. David dropped them off in the morning and Jennifer took them home in the afternoon. After a few weeks, the girls got used to the teachers and their group, started staying full-time and coming home later with their father. Jennifer got a job as an engineer at one of the firms where she had worked long ago before her maternity leave. They accepted her reluctantly because of her young children, worried that she would take frequent time off and sick leave. But Jennifer wasn't too worried about that, as she was looking forward to a new chapter in her life. She walked to work 2 stops on the bus, subway 30 minutes away. It was only an hour-and-a-half commute to get to work in time for the 9 a.m. start of the day. Jennifer left the house at 8:30 before her husband. So David would collect the girls and Jennifer would prepare their clothes in advance and hang them on the chairs. Claire and Patricia had breakfast at the nursery. Jennifer and David were in the office. They each prepared their own food in containers of scrambled eggs, sandwiches, porridge. They began to see and talk less often. Jennifer was glad of that. The less often she had to play the role of happy wife, the happier she felt. Sitting at the same table, she looked at him distantly as a guest and began to notice the small imperfections on his face, the wrinkles, the gray color of his skin. Jennifer looked forward to the summer and the long-awaited trip in the hope that she would be able to fall in love with her husband again, to regain the trust and intimacy she had lost. On May holidays, she wanted to go to the cottage with her parents and children. It was necessary to clean up the garden, make beds. Jennifer hoped that there would be an opportunity to talk to her husband alone, entrusting the children to their grandmothers, to discuss their relationship, to share their thoughts. After all, she thought, we can cry and separate. It's better than trying to live on the ashes of a relationship. To the surprise of her parents and David's parents, he refused to go to the cottage, citing ill health. "It's the heat," Jennifer's mother sighed into the phone. "I can't stand the heat, especially on the road." David himself said that during the May holidays he would be traveling to another city. In response to Jennifer's reasonable question about the permissibility and legitimacy of the management's decision to deprive employees of their legitimate days off, he replied, "There are several residents in a house there who suffered carbon monoxide poisoning due to a ventilation design error. We need to go and collect evidence of our innocence. You know how such cases are solved nowadays. They'll blame it on us and put innocent people in jail." Jennifer agreed and didn't object. But after she and Claire and Patricia had seen David off, standing on the porch and waving at the car as it drove away, she had an idea. "Girls, why don't you and I go to the cottage ourselves? It's cool, it's fresh, shade from the trees. They're probably already swimming in the river, aren't they?" She spent the evening thinking, and in the morning she packed a snack and called a cab. The ride was quick. The cab driver was pleased. "You're lucky you didn't go yesterday. There was such a traffic collapse on the roads, traffic jams in both directions. Everyone was going to their summer homes." As if they didn't know that they weren't the only smart ones, that the whole city would be leaving in the evening, and in the morning it would be a pleasure to drive on a free road, he said. Jennifer nodded and closed her eyes, putting her face in the cool breeze from the open window. The cab driver helped unload things out of the trunk and get the tired children out of their seats. After receiving his thanks and payment, he drove off, honking goodbye. Jennifer, Patricia, and Claire entered the yard. As they walked up to the porch, they looked for the key under a large concrete planter, and to their surprise, they didn't find it. So Jennifer muttered, "Grandma Samantha or your grandfather has hidden the key somewhere. We should call them." Jennifer's mother didn't pick up the phone for a long time, but on the second attempt she did. "Yes, Jennifer, hi Mom. Are you guys asleep?" "We just woke up," came a voice. "We slept for a few hours before the heat wave. My blood pressure spiked last night. How are you?" "We're at the cottage with the girls. We're at the cottage. I can't find the key. Where did you hide it?" There was silence. "Grandma Samantha, can you hear us?" Jennifer asked. "What are you doing out there?" "We came for a swim," she said uncertainly. She didn't want to be cooped up in the heat. "It's nice here." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Why? I know you wouldn't have come with us, that you were all sick." Jennifer couldn't take it anymore. "Tell me where the keys are, please. I really have to go to the bathroom. I'll call you back later and talk to you if you want." "There's no key," said the mother. "We have to knock and call. You don't have to break it." Jennifer frowned. She walked to the door and knocked. She turned back to Claire and Patricia, who were looking at the dandelions. Footsteps were heard. Someone put on slippers and came to the door. "Is that you?" Jennifer heard a familiar voice. The door lock clicked. David, sleepy, covered his eyes with the palm of his hand against the bright sunlight. "Jennifer?" His voice was full of bewilderment. She looked incomprehensively at her husband, and he at her. Patricia and Claire ran up to David, hugging his legs. "Hi, Daddy. Hi, Daddy," they exclaimed. In the back of the living room, behind David on the couch, Jennifer noticed some movement. Her eyes bloodshot, her hands clenched into fists. Pushing her husband aside, without removing her shoes, she walked with a firm, determined gait to the couch and yanked the blanket from whoever was hiding under it. She saw a boy of about 4 years of age. "Daddy," the boy called out, crying. He stood up on the couch and reached out his hand to Jennifer, holding onto the headboard with the other. Patricia and Claire splayed their arms and hid behind their father. He walked over to the boy, taking him in his arms. He said softly, kissed him on the top of his head, and held him close. "Who is it?" Jennifer asked quietly, unable to feel her own lips. "I'll explain in a moment," David replied. "Who is it, David? Why don't you say something?" "It's your son," he said. "Dad," the boy said, staring at Jennifer with weeping eyes. It was Patricia and Claire's turn to cry after the strange child called their daddy twice. "I'll explain everything. Just calm down." First, David pointed his gaze at the children. On unsteady legs, Jennifer walked over to the girls, knelt down in front of them, hugged them, and wiped the tears from their cheeks. "It's okay," she repeated, not realizing she was crying herself. When the children's crying stopped, they took everyone into the kitchen, poured tea, put cereal on plates, and sat down at the table. Jennifer did everything in a fog. She broke a cup, cut her finger. When she finally sank into a chair, she realized how tired she was, how much she wanted to sleep and wander somewhere quiet. "Who is it?" She repeated the question she had asked earlier. "This is John," David answered, biting into an apple. "Alex's son." Jennifer's eyes nearly fell out of her orbits. "What, shush?" David took her hand in his. "You scare the kids, they'll start crying again. That's Alex's son. Tara doesn't know about him." "How does he have a son? Was he cheating?" She realized from the meaningful look in her husband's eyes how stupid that question sounded. He was cheating, which means he didn't tell Tara or me, Jennifer concluded. David took another bite of his apple. "Why? His aunt, his mother's sister, is going to take him soon. She's in the process of getting custody." "What about his mother?" Jennifer asked. "Deceased. They were hit by a truck while crossing the road with a friend. Last fall, Alex got a call from the hospital telling him everything. They found his number in his mother's cell phone. David put the apple aside. He was listed as John's dad and his name was on the certificate. Only Alex didn't want to take John in. So I took his son so as not to destroy Tara's family. Jennifer grinned and pulled her hand out. Sounds very plausible. Do you think you're lying to me? Yes? Then I'll tell you my version. She bit her lip. It's your son, the one you've been hiding from me. And now you're trying to come up with some ridiculous excuse. And you got your parents involved. Jesus, who was looking after him? Your mom, my mom, all of them. He was with a babysitter, David said. And you want to call Alex? He grinned wickedly. Let him tell him how he wanted to put his son in an orphanage. Latent tears rolled down Jennifer's cheeks, her throat dry. She left the table with the phone in her hands, walked across the yard, found a shade under a tree, and sat down on the grass. Dialed Alex's number. She waited with indescribable horror for the dial tone to change to his voice. Yes? Alex answered. Alex, hi. It's Jennifer. Did you find out why you're calling so early? Tara's here. Tara's at home with the kids. I went to get some water. Alex, is it true? Jennifer's voice trembled. Do you have a son? What son? He muttered. John. His mother died in the fall. The hospital called you, asked you to come over. I don't know any. Alex cut him off and hung up. Jennifer remained sitting on the ground with her cell phone in her hands, listening to the occasional bird trills in the apple blossoms above her and the dense buzzing of bees. After a few minutes, Alex called back. Well, how could you cheat on her? Jennifer asked, confused. She breathes you. She'd be devastated if she found out. That's why I'm not saying a word, Alex said. Is your son healthy? Cheryl began after a short pause. He's eating cereal. I'm drunk, Alex said angrily. We were celebrating a wholesale shipment to Chicago. Went to a bar, had a drink. I don't remember the rest of it. I woke up at her place. The poor thing ran through Jennifer's mind. But she held back the urge to sarcasm. She wanted to clear up the situation before the end, without any unnecessary scenes. Did you want to put your son in an orphanage, like David said? She asked after a silence. Jennifer, Alex began, choosing his words. You're not stupid, are you? What was I supposed to do? Bring him home, say, here, Tara, this is my son from another woman. He's going to live with us now? Is that it? David was wrong to get involved in this. My guys would have given him a hard time. He can't keep his mouth shut. Jennifer couldn't find anything to say. The only phrase in her head was, oh my God, oh my God. Alex shouted something into the phone for a long time, but she didn't listen to him, slowly lowered her hand with the phone, put it down beside her, and lay on her back. The wood stabbed, tickling her neck. Jennifer smiled. So what, you're not cheating on your wife? Chick. But can you call him a good man? Is it good to deceive Thera and hide the truth from her, she thought. She reluctantly got up, picked up her cell phone, and walked into the house. Patricia, Claire, and John were sitting on the carpet in front of the TV watching some cartoon. David was sitting with them. When he saw Jennifer, he headed into the kitchen with the empty milk glasses and with a nod of his head beckoned her to follow, loading the dirty dishes into the sink. Everything's soaked. Everybody's fed, everybody's happy, David said. They'll take them to the river after lunch. Jennifer pressed her back against the wall. Her knees trembled. We have to tell Tara, David. It's not right. He looked at his wife in surprise. Are you afraid of upsetting her? I'm afraid of betraying her. Covering up this infidelity, the child, is a betrayal. David ran the dishes in the sink, washed them, wiped his hands, and stood across from her, pulling his cell phone out of his pocket. If you want, I'll tell Tara everything, David said. Honestly, my tongue itched. I'll stop you myself, Jennifer replied. I'll tell her myself. I'll go into town tomorrow, meet her, prepare her somehow. How can you prepare for something like this? David frowned. It's better to invite her here. Do you think Alex will let me go? Jennifer's face stretched into a grin. He's leaving today. I asked Elizabeth not to tell him where I was going. Tell him David thought of something in his mind. Tell him it's necessary, that it's a surprise. For lunch, Jennifer made buttermilk dip. While she was cutting vegetables and chicken meat, she mentally imagined the conversation with her friend and the forthcoming explanations, choosing words. During lunch, she was silent and aloof for the same reason. She reacted to her daughter's appeals with a strained, guilty smile. After lunch, David put all the children in a garden wheelbarrow, threw an old blanket in the bottom of it, hung a towel around their necks, and took them to the river. Jennifer closed the wicket behind them, went back under her apple tree, dialed Thera. She answered almost immediately. Jennifer, hi. If you want to call us out, we're just about to go to our swamp in the park, aka by the lake. Come join us. Jennifer laughed. Beauty and your swamp. Call a cab. I'm taking you to my parents' summer house. The same one where we had our first vodka in 11th grade. I'm on my way, Tara replied. Only Jennifer lowered her voice. Don't tell Alex you're coming here and that you're meeting me. Why? Tara was confused. That's the way it has to be. There's a surprise waiting for you that he doesn't want to show you. Tara mumbled something in her pleasant voice and promised to keep the secret. 2 hours later, Jennifer heard the creaking of gravel near the gate. She had spent the whole time lying on the grass and, as it seemed to her, had gained strength for the final act of the play in which she had been participating against her will for months. Patricia and Claire and David returned from the river, wet and happy. John was with them, too. By the time Thera arrived at their house, they were sitting on the rug, now drawing something on sheets of paper scattered on the floor. Jennifer met Tara's friend, hugged her, took her under her arm and led her into the house. Where's Ethan going? He didn't want to go. He was meeting some friends, Jennifer said. I asked my mother to watch him. She'd just run out for a visit. Tara stopped, pulled a bottle of burgundy liquid out of her bag, handed it to Jennifer. I don't drink, she doesn't drink, Jennifer remarked. Alex left for 3 days in Chicago. Who'd you bring it to? I guess it was fate that you invited me, replied Tara. They went into the house. Tara said hello to David and turned to John. What are you? Lucky neighbor, John replied, staring at Tara silently. Let's go get a drink, Cheryl called out to her husband. Tara put the bottle on the table. Brought Mom's specialty. As she sat down at the table and sipped the tincture, Tara remembered her question. So, who's the boy? Alex's son Jennifer exhaled without hesitation. Cheryl looked understandingly first at her, then at David. Their eyes narrowed under that gaze and looked down at the floor. Alex's son? Alex cheated on you? Tara asked. A few years ago when he went on a business trip to Seattle. John was born. That's his name, Jennifer replied. She felt David take her hand. His mother died in the fall. The woman's relatives couldn't be found, but the police found Alex's number in her phone. He came over and wrote a waiver, told his friends. They contacted me. I talked Alex into taking John. Found a nanny, paid for the upkeep. Now there's a good woman. Soon she'll adopt him and all this will be over. Is this some kind of joke? Tara interrupted her. If this is a joke, it's not funny, guys. It's not a joke, David entered the conversation. That's what happened. I'll call Alex. He'll confirm it. The shot glass slipped from Tara's weakened hand. She leaned back in her chair and looked Jennifer in the eye, the corner of her lips twitching like a flag in the wind. She could see that tears were coming to her throat, that Tara was about to burst into tears. And you've been lying to me for almost a year, she said. Jennifer didn't find out until today. And I lied. Why? I didn't want to hurt you. And then today, all of a sudden I did. Jennifer changed my mind. She thinks it's wrong to keep the truth from you, that it's a betrayal, David said. It is, Tara blurted out. Tears sprang from her eyes. You're a traitor, David. She cried. At first it was only occasional quiet sobs. Then Tara fell face down on the table, covered her head with her hands and sobbed, shaking her whole body. David closed the door to the living room. Jennifer moved a chair over. She hugged her friend with one arm and stroked her head with the other. She told her husband to go to the children. And when he came out, Jennifer buried her nose in Tara's shoulder, crying with her. With each tear shed, it became easier and easier to breathe. Half an hour later, both were sitting on the kitchen floor, their cheeks in tears. A half-empty bottle of tincture stood on the carpet between them. Jennifer looked happy and elated. Tara, on the other hand, looked devastated. Good mother. Jennifer smiled. She got drunk in the middle of the day, Tara, and threw it away. How am I supposed to look him in the eye? What am I supposed to say to him? Oh my God. When you talk to your husband, said Tara. And you, Jennifer, you're smiling. I wanted to apologize to him first. But no. A lie to save him is a lie. Let him thank me for not nailing him with a rolling pin. I think I'm ready to hit Alex with a rolling pin. Swing it around and beat him lying down until I'm tired. We were worried about you, but now I'm more worried about your Alex. Jennifer poured a refill of the tincture and laughed. In the evening, Tara met John, sat him on her lap, and told him something long. John listened and nodded. Are you that good? Tara exclaimed loudly, kissing John on the top of his head. You're going to be okay. I will. After seeing Tara off, Jennifer made the bed and put the children Claire, Patricia, and John to bed in the attic room. They fell fast asleep after a long day. David prepared dinner tuna salad and leftover tincture. Dinner was eaten on the rug. Jennifer snuggled against his side, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm so tired, David, she said. Let's go to bed, David said. That's not what I meant. Not about sleep, Jennifer replied. She jabbed her index finger at David's solar plexus and his forehead. Tired here and here. Jennifer felt warm breath on her forehead and a weightless kiss. I'm sorry, David said. I won't forgive you for this circus. No forgiveness for you. And I'll give my parents a beating when I get back. I won't care about their blood pressure or their aches and pains, Jennifer said. She grinned. I'll make you beg for forgiveness. How about a divorce? I'll put my parents in a nursing home. And seriously? Jennifer paused to think. Seriously, I don't have the energy to think about it. I don't know how we can regain trust between us and build on what's left. I don't think it's possible. I'll be jealous and suspicious of you for the rest of my life. I'd rather get a divorce. David was silent for a while, sighed heavily. I wanted the best, but it turned out the same as always, he said. Why did you refuse to come with me then? Jennifer woke up. What could have happened in 3 days of vacation with John? Explain why you're here now. He cried, refused to eat, hid from the nanny, afraid of her, begged to go home. I'd come over, he'd calm down, that's all. When you said you were doing someone else's job because you were doing a better job, she wasn't talking about Alex? Jennifer asked. About everyone, David answered. The leaves rustled through the open living room window. It was starting to rain in the garden, and the wind was lifting the tulle, filling the room with coolness and freeing her head from her thoughts. Jennifer felt a sudden lightness, pulled herself up and stood up, wanting to finish the conversation soon and go to bed. This, David, is what I want to tell you next time. If you decide to save the baby, bring him to my house. I feel like a bad woman. Terrible. They stayed at the cottage for a week. They bought groceries at the local store, and from the grandmothers in the neighborhood, fresh eggs and milk. They started the day with a walk together in the morning and finished it in the evening with the same walk. Jennifer developed freckles on her nose and shoulders. David learned to chop wood and stoked the bathhouse. Claire brought a kitten from somewhere and shared it with Patricia all the time. They named him Leo and put him in the hallway. Patricia brought him milk in a bowl every morning. Claire's cat food. John didn't participate in the cat sharing. He preferred to sit on David's lap, digging with him in the vegetable garden, watching cartoons. Jennifer was not jealous of her husband, admitted that John needed protection and attention, but could not bring herself to believe that it was right and natural to have a third, alien child in their family. She looked forward to the arrival of Christopher and Aunt Elizabeth. Elizabeth arrived on May 8th. She was a tall, slender woman of about 35 with a high forehead and large, hot palms. Seeing her, Jennifer thought, this is what a mother should look like. John didn't know Elizabeth. He looked at her warily at first, but when he saw the pearl pendant around her neck, he glowed. Like Mommy's, he said in his childish language. Yes, that's right, Mama had one just like it. Elizabeth had a court date ahead of her where Alex would give up John and Elizabeth would become the legal guardian. They would now live together. Elizabeth rented a hotel room for the duration of the proceedings. Then John would go to San Francisco, where Elizabeth had a house, a husband, and a cat. We always wanted a child, Elizabeth confessed. It never worked out. We thought we'd sinned or done something wrong. But now I look at John and realize how well God has it all worked out. Jennifer had no doubt that everything would go smoothly. Elizabeth had called Tara the day before she arrived, promising not to talk to her husband until John was in good hands. She didn't want to rely on Alex's moods, and his idea of morality, from Jennifer's point of view, left much to be desired. She was immensely proud of her friend, who had turned into a strong, wise woman. After returning home, Jennifer called Tara to encourage her and arranged to meet her for the weekend. Tara answered in her normal voice. From her words, Jennifer realized that Alex, afraid of the proceedings and scandals, had decided to prolong his absence, which he had informed his wife the day before. I hope he doesn't show up before the trial, David said. Then he wouldn't have to lie. On the day of the trial, Jennifer took the subway to work, as usual. For a long time, she couldn't concentrate on the laptop screen. During the briefing, she chewed on her thumbnail. She was distracted for a long time, and looking at one point, she was ashamed of her absent-mindedness. She sincerely found no objective reason to worry about the fate of someone else's child. All the more reason to worry about nothing. Jennifer kept glancing at her watch. At 4 p.m., a notification appeared on her cell phone screen. I wrote to Elizabeth, "Everything is fine. John is with me. I'm so happy." In the evening, their apartment was going round and round. David arrived in the evening, bringing wine and appetizers. David's parents came to visit. Mom brought her signature fish pie. Not particularly caring about the comfort of the neighbors, they put jazz on the speakers, danced for a long time, hugging and joking. After the arrival of the police officer, they turned off the jazz, exhaled, put the children to bed, sat on the sofa, discussing the latest news. "Mom, I'm still offended by you. Mom, I'm still offended." "Until you give me the recipe for the pie," Cheryl said. "You're a career woman again." David smiled. "Daughter, you won't have time to bake pies." "Leave that to us old folks," replied Dad. Speaking of which, Cheryl said cryptically, "I want to quit. Don't look at me like that. It's true. I took the job to get away from the mess you made. But now there's no mess, and frankly, I don't want to work." Everybody laughed. They sat up late into the night, as in those distant times it seemed to Jennifer, when her life had flowed smoothly and clearly. She was very glad to be home again, in a warm bed, in this apartment, surrounded by people dear to her heart, not causing distrust. Seeing David off with his parents. At the third hour of the night, closing the door, complained to each other about tomorrow's workday. 2 weeks of freedom, Jennifer boasted, wrapping her arms around her husband's neck. He kissed her for the first time in almost 6 months. He stared into her brown eyes for a long time. Gently taking her in his arms, he carried her to the bedroom. "What's the point of going to bed tonight?" he said, closing the door with his foot. At work, Jennifer was in the clouds with a blissful smile on her face. People who worked in the same office with her looked at Jennifer with bewilderment, trying to understand what this woman, who had worked so hard to get a place in the company and now had submitted her resignation letter and was sleeping on the job, wanted to achieve. She was awakened by a phone call. It was Tara. "You're at work. Can you speak freely?" she asked. "I'm at work, but I can talk," Jennifer replied. Well, Tara sighed. "He arrived today. I packed my stuff, put my bag on the doorstep. He bumped into her when he came in, started yelling from the doorstep, 'You'll be sorry. I'll take your child away from you. You don't even have a real job.'" Jennifer's heart sank as she pictured the scene. "Are you okay?" she asked. My parents kicked him out with the gifts he brought. My dad remembered his car, which Alex took and wrecked. Gone, basically, Tara exclaimed. Jennifer. He's gone. Jennifer listened to Tara cry for a minute. I'm sorry, he turned out to be a fraud, she said at last. Tara laughed through her tears. Fraud is my favorite word. You know, Jen, if mine's a cheater, what's yours? A daddy for hire. Jennifer smiled.